There was a man his name was Francesco, and we named the city of San Francisco for this little monk. He gave up all of his worldly possessions, and he provided us with a message. Remember earlier I said Einstein's observation that all of us, everybody else is concerned with details. All I want to do is learn to think like God. Do you see what he meant now? Can you see that? He wants to think and sound and feel like his source. Well, Francesco, who later became known as St. Francis of Assisi, a place where I've visited many times and feel a very deep and powerful connection. The words to that I'd like you to play over and over again. The words to that are very powerful words. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. It's not a prayer. It's not a religious statement. It is a beautiful technology for teaching us to bring the presence of higher, spiritual, divine, organizing intelligence to the presence of every energy that is not of this source. Every energy of hatred, anger, fear, worry. And we need it in the world more than we've ever needed it before. I'd like to suggest to you that when you learn to connect to intention, as I've been discussing here in this program, that something will happen as you go out into the world. You will find that your presence will do things to other people, even without you being aware of it. When you are at this level, one of the things that happens is you begin to instill calmness. We convince others by our presence, said Walt Whitman. People will feel calmer when they're around you. You ever be in a group of people where you instantly know that when you're around them, it just feels good. You feel better about yourself just for having been in the room with them? That's what will happen. And there's also people who, when you're in the room with them, you want to run away because they bring very low energy. And people say to me, you know, other people are always bringing me down. I'm working with it. If you knew what my family was like, if you lived with the people I live with, you wouldn't be saying these kind of things. And I say, low energy people can never bring you down. You have low energy because you hate people for hating you. You get angry at people for being angry at you. You judge people for judging you. You join others in their low energy. What did Sky just say? Make me a channel of your peace. Don't send me peace. Francesco didn't say, I need some peace. I'm short of peace. But this is only peace. It can only provide. Make me a channel of this. Allow me to be this. Your presence, when you connect to intention, to the field of intention, as I've been describing it here today, your presence makes other people feel energized. They want to do more. They want to write. They want to create their music. They want to make Mr. Holland's Opus. It's like, who doesn't love that movie? And it isn't because it was such a great movie, which I think it happens to be, but it was because every one of us has that in Rocky. How many people saw Rocky? Remember Rocky by Sylvester Stallone? And you walk out of there, and you might despise boxing, but you go, there's a Rocky in me. We all feel, you walk out of there, you just feel like, it's like your presence makes others feel connected and uplifted. Your presence makes others people feel purposeful. It inspires them to greatness. And there's also an impact that you have on the consciousness of all of humanity. In Power versus Force, again, Hawkins speaks about what happens to us. What happens to us when here we have in this room probably 1,000 or more people in this beautiful, majestic theater in Boston. Just by your being here, just by watching this program and taking on some of these ideas, you change the energy of the entire planet. Everything is connected to everything else. The Native Americans used to say, no tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. We're all branches on a tree called humanity.
In order to cultivate your witness, you need to learn to observe your reactions in order to go beyond them. It is the going beyond that is the crux of the sacred quest. There are many ways that you can use the observation process. Here are a couple of them that are very important. The first is observing your body. This is one of the areas of being the witness that most of us have practiced somewhat. In general, we allow our body to function without interference. We are aware that there is the body and that there is a ghost in the machine, if you will. For as long as you can remember, you have been observing this phenomenon of a body. It is also true that you know that the entity that is doing the observing is removed in some dramatic way from that which it is witnessing. As you are listening to these words, you are allowing your body to act out its destiny without your meddling. You are not busy beating your heart or filling your lungs or oxygenating your blood supply or circulating your vital fluids. You allow your body to operate itself, and you allow another part of you to know the way of being the divine, quiet, non-interfering observer. This way has served you well. By just observing your body and detaching yourself from its functioning, it works as perfectly as it was ordained to. If you were constantly monitoring and attempting to control your bodily functions, you would be unduly attached to its outcome, and you would inhibit its natural functions. The times in your life when you worry or interfere with the natural functions of your body are the times when you find it breaking down. Feed your body the wrong foods and it will respond with lethargy and disease. Fail to exercise it and it will become overweight and groggy. Ignore its needs for fresh air and healthy environment and it will fall into disrepair. Feed it narcotic substances or artificial drugs and it will react with violent symptoms. When your body is in any state of disrepair, from being overweight to having back pains or nervousness or influenza or cancer or anything that is not the way of perfect health that your body knows at the cellular and genetic levels, then you are being called back to the position of loving witness. The second way of observing is called observing your mind. Your mind is filled with thousands of thoughts every day. They come and they go like trains in a terminal. One enters, another takes its place, one exits, and along comes another. First, you want to watch your thoughts. Then you want to watch yourself watching your thoughts. Here is the door to the inner space where, free from all thoughts, you experience the bliss and the freedom that transport you directly to your higher self. The simple exercise of watching your mind manufacturing its thoughts will eventually cause unwanted, unnecessary, erroneous thoughts to dissolve. In the process of cultivating the witness, you learn to quiet your mind, to take inventory, and dispose of or reassign thoughts that generate self-defeating or ego-centered responses. In this simple process, you also come to know your spiritual self. Ego-generated thoughts play a huge role in creating the world that the ego wishes to create. Each of my thoughts seem to demand it be considered the most important. Troubles begin with a thought that you put into your mind and allow to fester to the point of anxiety. The anxiety begins to manifest in your life in physically destructive ways, which we call things like arthritis, high blood pressure, and career cardiacs. The loving, non-judgmental energy received from the observer or the witness will allow these thoughts to flow in and out as naturally as the ocean tides. Tides in, tides out. Thoughts in, thoughts out. You will learn to be a witness to your thoughts in the same way that you observe the tide. And the process will cleanse and redistribute and remove thoughts in much the same way as the driftwood on the beach. What remains is generally quite pleasing. Witnessing your thoughts will take some practice. With proficiency comes wonder and delight. Trauma is dissolved in the thinking stage and prevented from manifesting into your everyday world. Begin to notice the noticer. As you take note of your worlds, both inner and outer, begin to familiarize yourself with the noticer who is behind that which is being noticed. If you do this several times each day, you will begin to see that you are much more than just a body and mind going through the program motions of your life. Your realization of your true self as the witness behind that which is being witnessed will bring you a new dimension of creativity and bliss. Try on this exercise. Think of something that has been bothering you for a long period of time. Now go to a quiet place and close your eyes. Just see the problem surfacing on the blank screen in your consciousness. Notice all aspects of the problem, what it looks like, when it shows up, what you feel when it is on your mind, the pain and the fear that you have when it is present, how you have dealt with it unsuccessfully in the past. Think of everything that you can which is related to the problem. Then, detach yourself in your mind from the problem. Just allow it to sit there on the screen of your mind. Look at it from the viewpoint of the compassionate witness who just non-judgmentally notices the screen. Watch it like a movie, allowing it to change in whatever way it does. Just observe it with loving permission for it to do whatever it wants to do. You will see it change and fade in and out of awareness. With each change or movement on the screen, remain in the caring witness mode of knowing the energy will do what it will and will also be accompanied by the loving energy from the witness. Often, just this act of observation will result in a feeling of the problem having dissipated. If that happens, observe that also from the position of caring observer. I once practiced this act of observation when I was injured and unable to play tennis. I reacted at first to the pain in my foot with statements like, "This injury is keeping me from doing what I want to do and I'm really upset about it." I found that no matter what I tried, the pain persisted, and I was unable to pivot and consequently had to discontinue an activity that I loved. I then took the witness stance. I no longer saw myself as having an injury. I attributed the pain only to my body and not to me. I witnessed the entire thing and merely watched it. I lovingly witnessed the pain, the way it showed up, my feelings of frustration about it, the color of the swelling, everything. But I refused to think of it as mine. It was only my body's problem. The very same day that I did this, the entire discomfort disappeared. I mean, it was gone from my body. I had put my attention on what was occurring and detached myself from it, and in what seemed like a few hours, I no longer had the pain and I was playing tennis as if I had never experienced any injury at all. In order to know the benefit of witnessing, you will have to banish the doubt about this as something that will work for you. Remember, you have been conditioned to believe that your body is the essence of your humanity. You've been taught to tackle problems with your physical and intellectual apparatus, not your higher self. Practice new self-talk sentences to replace your old identification with your physical body. I am that which owns this body. I am not the body itself. I can't be reached if you come to me with hatred or anger. I cannot worry when I refuse to be the worrier and simply observe that worrier and the worries. Self-talk sentences will keep you centered on your spiritual domain. You will find that many things that you worried about or experienced in a negative fashion are slowly beginning to diminish from your life.
Let's go for a moment to our dream. And just assume that we're going to have a dream. We're in bed. And let me ask you this question. This is a question I like to ask for you to just contemplate, one of those sort of cones. When you go to sleep at night and enter your dream state, what happens to the bed? Just think about that. What happens to the bed? Now you're in your dream, okay? So just propel yourself into a dream state. And in your dream, you notice, let's say you're over here and you're in a room. And in this room, you look across the room and you notice that there's a podium in the room. And it has some objects on it. Now you're in your dream. So in the state of dream consciousness, you say to yourself, I would like to examine that podium more closely. How do you do it in your dream? How do you examine it more closely in your dream state? Do you get out of bed? Is there a bed? Now, we're talking about 1/3 of your life here, folks, okay? 1/3 of your life. As Lao Tzu said, I went to sleep and dreamt that I was a butterfly. Then I woke up, and now I don't know. Am I a man who dreamt he was a butterfly, or am I a butterfly who's dreaming that he's a man? So in your dream state, do you get up out of bed? Keep it right over there. Say, excuse me, honey, wait, get out. And walk over and say, there's a galley of a new book, and there's a pen here, and there's a glass of water. I think I'll have a drink of that. There's a microphone stand. There's things. Do you do that? No, you don't do that. Because you enter your dream without any doubt. So what you do in your dream state is, are you ready? Shoo! Stay alert. And you bring it to you, don't you? In your dream state. Why? Because you have the power of your intention, can have an idea, and whatever you need for the fulfillment of your dream, you bring to you. Here it is. Here it is. Whatever you need. So you're 20 years old in your dream, and you need a jerk to be married to for the next 20 years. There he is. Isn't that great? You need a Maserati? There it is. Whatever you need for the dream, you bring to it. Then you leave the dream and you come into waking consciousness, and now you look back on the dream and you now have a whole new set of things that you've introduced. And that set of things is called doubt. And the second key to higher awareness, which I'll get to shortly, is called banishing the doubt, but it's connected here. As you enter your dream state, you enter without any doubt about your capacity to do anything. So you can fly, you can jump over trees, you can be young again, you can transcend death, you can stay underwater, you can communicate telepathically with anyone that you want to, right? You have all of these incredible powers. And if someone has died and you want them back, you bring them back. If you need to be 12 again, and then you come into this state and you say, I can't do any of those things because you're stuck in paradigms. And the paradigm says, you cannot change your shape, you can't shape shift. If you're a certain age, you're a certain age. You can't move yourself into, you can't be in more than one place at the same time, which you can do in your dream, easily. You can't do those things. And one of the things I talk about in Your Sacred Self is like learning to become a waking dreamer, to understand that you don't have to go to sleep in order to dream. So now you wake up, and what I'm suggesting to you is that this is also a dream, only it's a 100-year dream. And in this 100-year dream, everything that you can do in your 8-hour dream, you can do in this 100-year dream. Everything. If you know better than to doubt it. And if you get rid of the paradigms that muck up your life. You have the capacity. But the minute that you introduce doubt into it, like that poem that I started out, Real Magic, which is really my effort to write about how to manifest miracles in your life. From Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he said, what if you slept? And what if in your sleep you dreamed? And what if in your dream you went to heaven and there picked a strange and wonderful flower? And what if when you awoke, you held that flower in your hand? Ah, what then? Is it possible to bring something from a dream state into a waking state? Or is that part of a paradigm? And the tiniest smidgen of doubt that enters your consciousness is what you will act upon. 7 key little words from Proverbs. As you think, so shall you be. If you think that it's not possible, what you think about is what expands. Or as Emerson said, the ancestor to every action is a thought. And the minute you have a doubtful thought in your consciousness, you will act upon that and manifest the fruit of that doubt. And not be able to see it. You will not see it.
So if we begin to shift our statements, the statements first of all that we say to ourselves, and then the statements that we say because, and so what I want everybody who's listening today to do is to take a look at all of the things in your life that you don't like, that aren't working the way you would like them to work, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's financial, whether it's with your health, whether with your job, with your friendships, or whatever it might be. And instead of saying, and when you ask yourself, now, how did it come to be this way? Kind of go back and go all the way back as far as you can go to even being a young boy or a young girl. And how many times have you heard or said the words that were predictive of this showing up in your life? And then get to a place where you start to change that around. And you have not only a different set of expectations, but a different way of making decrees, so that you decree that things are going to work out, that your prosperity is on its way, that your relationship is going to improve, that your health is something that you have control over. I'll give you an example of this, and then we'll open up to the phones. My daughter Serena is here.
who's written a book called Don't Die With Your Music Still In You. It's a book that I give out on the show to people who call in, my experience growing up with spiritual parents. And she has a new little baby. Her baby's name is Sailor, and Sailor is 3 months old. Now, Sailor has something called acid reflux, that's so that her stomach, so when she's nursing or when she gets her bottle or whatever it is, she starts throwing up a lot. Now, my daughter Serena has had this her entire lifetime, from the time that she was a little girl, and her mother, my wife, also had that when she was a young girl. It's this thing called acid reflux, okay? And they have little prescriptions for it, Prilosec and things like that people take. It's sort of predictive of what Serena has experienced for herself in her whole life. So I said to her yesterday, I said, honey, do you realize that that little baby who came out of you shares your DNA and shares your blood and is as, just because the cord has been cut, but is just as connected to you, spiritually and metaphysically and mentally, is just as connected to you as if she were inside of your womb. And that you had this experience yourself, and rather than already setting up this decree that Sailor's going to have this, is just something she's going to have to struggle with. My mother had it. She has, I had it, and now she's going to have it. I said, you have the capacity to communicate with her and begin to program into her subconscious mind from the time that she, and every time you look at her and see her, she can, when you look at her, she looks at you different than anybody else because you're her mother, and she looks into your eyes and all that. And instead of telling her that you have acid reflux and I'm really sorry, I'm going to give you more milk than you need and you're going to have this for a lifetime, I said, you have the power to heal this, to put your hand on her stomach and on her throat. And when she's taking this, instead of convincing yourself that this child is going to have this for a lifetime, I want you to begin to just say to yourself, I can heal this for you, honey, and talk to her like this. And I put my hand on her stomach and I said, you're such a sweet baby, and you don't have to have this throwing up stuff, and you don't have anything called acid reflux. You're perfectly healthy. You're a divine creation. You are perfect. Mommy's going to be here for you and show you exactly how to deal with this, and start programming her subconscious mind right now, so that when words do begin to develop within her, and she speaks first in words and then in sentences, what you're going to say is that you don't have this. This is just a minor little obstacle, and it's not anything that's going to dominate your life. And read your sister's book, Goodbye Bumps, because she was able to do the very same thing by shifting her consciousness around. So, we get programmed from the time that we're little, about what we can do and what we can't do, how fast we can run, how much we can lift, how athletic that we are, how good we are at mathematics, how, whether or not we're coordinated, whether we can dance, whether we can do a headstand, whether we get, it's just almost every few minutes of our life, there are these decrees coming out of us. And you don't want to have any decree coming out of you that isn't predictive of what you would like to attract and create for yourself, versus a decree that says, it's going to be difficult, I can't make it happen, my luck is never going to work out, I've been sick, this runs in our family, my mother had it, my grandmother had it, and on and on and on and on it goes.
Now you will hear about 3 energy fields and ways of keeping them uncontaminated. The first energy field is your immediate energy body, which I also refer to as etheric or faster. From a standing position, extend your arm forward and mentally note the most distant point where your fingers extend. Now imagine your arm extending straight above your head to a point over your body, and then behind you and beneath you as well. You now have an image of a field of energy which continuously surrounds your body. I call this field your fast energy body, which is inseparable from your solid and visible slower energy body. Using your imagination, take a moment now to visualize this field of faster energy with its edges or boundaries around you. When another person, particularly a stranger, crosses your boundary, you immediately feel as if you've been invaded. You move back instinctively to create a safer distance. Why? Because your energy body feels the invasive force and alerts you with a state of discomfort. If someone remains in your energy body field for an extended period of time, they begin to affect your entire being with their energy, bringing you down if you feel out of sync with them, and raising you up if they resonate to a higher energy vibration than you. I refer to the second energy field as your broader environmental energy field. To get a sense of this physical energy field, think about your energy field extending into your home, your workplace, your family, and your community. The vibrational pattern of this energy field is your broader environmental energy field. This energy field, in which your solid body walks and talks and sleeps and works and plays, is impacted by the energy frequency of whoever enters it. Now I want you to think of a field of energy so immense that you cannot even create imaginary boundaries for it. I call this the mind field energy. Your thoughts and the thoughts of others interact in your mind field in such a way as to raise or lower your frequency of vibration. When the thoughts and feelings of others impinge upon your mind energy field, there will be one of two results. Either your energy field will be increased, as is said to have happened when Buddha and Jesus entered a village. Just their presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around them. Or your energy field will be decreased and consequently become contaminated. The way others think and how they radiate out their thought energy can impact you. But it is not only people who impact your energy fields. Noise levels, air quality, food purity, all touch and affect your fields of energy. What you may not realize is that you play a potent role in keeping your energy fields clean and uncontaminated, and that you also have a salubrious and cleansing effect on the energy field of those around you. Hopefully, you will be motivated to begin implementing a new approach that will clear all of your energy fields and maintain a state of clarity, free of energy patterns that contaminate your life in any way. How do you treat this body, which is the living organism that sends out the waves of electromagnetic energy? What foods do you use to replenish and replace it with? What toxins do you absorb? How much peaceful rest do you provide for it? Do you exercise it regularly? Is your emotional state calm? Do you meditate to bring yourself into harmony with God? Your body must be loved. It is your home and must be cleansed of all junk. Your body is not your enemy. You do not need to get free of your body in order to access spiritual guidance. This perfectly functioning machine called your body knows what is needed, where it is needed, and how to prioritize those needs in times of crisis. You control this marvelously complex instrument that is your home through your thoughts. The second factor that impacts your immediate field of energy is what you allow to impact your body from without. What kinds of people do you allow into your immediate space? When you allow toxic people into your immediate energy field, you will find that your feelings of well-being diminish. You must say goodbye, albeit with unconditional love, to anyone who pollutes your life space with slowed-down energy. Or, you must be prepared to stave off the intrusion of lower energy people first by recognizing it and then neutralizing it by radiating stronger energy yourself. The problem with attempting to continually be a neutralizer is that the effort required often exhausts you, and that level of fatigue makes you susceptible to the lower energies. If someone brings anxiety, shame, depression, fear, whining, complaining, apathy, stress, worry, anger, guilt, or any of the multitude of what I call lower energy patterns, they are inviting you to join in their misery and load your life up with the problems that they live with every day. Resolve to remove yourself from any toxicity that threatens the purity of your life space. When you feel yourself being breached, take immediate action, first by recognizing what is happening, and then moving in counteraction. Consciously send out thoughts of kindness and love. Remove yourself in a conflict-free way from the invading energetic forces. Anyone who you allow to be a regular visitor in your body energy field must come with love, peace, and the higher spiritual energies. The closer you come to being in a dynamic state of grace in your thoughts and refusing to be in the fields of those who are projecting lower energy thoughts, the closer you come to being in God's mind field. You may believe that the opposite of love is hate. I do not see these two emotions as opposites. In fact, love and hate are often closely aligned. To me, the opposite of love is fear. When you have fear, you do not have love. Ego uses fear as a way to keep authentic love out of your life. When love is not present in your life, you have succumbed to ego and allowed fear in where love could be. You have allowed ego to replace God. Learning to experience authentic love means abandoning ego's insistence that you have much to fear and that you are in an unfriendly world. This begins with an assessment of your reluctance to embrace love. If you are not experiencing love in your life right now, it is because you are, in some way, afraid. You need to examine your fears with honesty and with love. When you do, you will transform your fears into love. You will open up a space within you that can only be occupied by love. In this space you are on purpose, walking the way of the sacred self. But first, you must see how you substitute fear for love. Your ego steadfastly promotes fear because it fears authentic love itself. This false self helps you convince yourself that you are in some way incomplete. That is the source of all fear. Afraid of having your emptiness, your incompleteness exposed, you expend a lot of energy creating a false image of happiness. The fear about exposing the emptiness keeps you seeking relationships that ego tells you will satisfy the longing within you. What happens is that you enter a relationship starved for the love that is your higher self. Your inner hunger is masked, pretending to be something else. No wonder so many people repeatedly think they have found love and repeatedly declare they've lost it. How different it is when you can notice the inner emptiness and think, what's not to like? This longing is part of being human and knowing love. Then you will let ego know that fear is not your choice. Love is your choice. Just imagine how our system might be if people knew they were already complete. What would you need to purchase? What would you need to have to own? Who would you have to impress? Who would you need to have on your arm? The answers give you an idea of how much we rely on the fear that we are incomplete and unacceptable as we are, and how unaware we are of our divine connection. The fear that is a substitute for love is simply a fear of being unacceptable. Virtually all fears can be traced directly back to self-esteem. If you love yourself, you will be able to transform your fears with love rather than allow them to direct your life. If you have an inner feeling of being complete and whole, knowing the loving presence that is there, then fear becomes a loving invitation to know more or to change something in your life. Fear will no longer threaten you as it did when you were unacquainted with your higher self. The inability to rely on the love that is our very essence shows up in many forms. Your ego wants you to believe that you are unacceptable and will gleefully assist you in creating an image to prove that it is so. Manifestations like obesity and personal slovenliness and eating disorders often are the fear-based projection of yourself. Ego can influence you to shun all efforts to be loved by others by refusing to allow the risk of an intimate encounter or the development of an intimate relationship. Ego often makes you selfishly pursue your own goals at others' expenses. You engage in perpetual conversation about yourself. We often use economic, social, and other types of excuses to defend behavior that does not extend love. For instance, you might excuse unloving or inconsiderate behavior because it's only my job, or because everyone else does it. Expressions of disgust or rudeness towards others are based on ego. They are heard in stores, on freeways, in offices, at airports, in restaurants, any place you are in your daily life. These are some of the common expressions of a fear-based ego struggling to keep you away from the experience of love that is your true essence. Before you begin to change these behaviors and thought patterns, you need to examine the payoffs. What is some part of your receiving as a payoff for listening intently to ego? Your ego works for its living. Its payoff is not money, but just in keeping alive. Your ego is not open to making contact with God because it would be immediately put out of business. Your ego is in direct conflict with your true purpose for being there. You are here to give and receive love. Your ego protects you from that vision by keeping you in a belief system that declares you are separate and special. By hanging on to the fears of your insufficiency, you can avoid taking any risks. As long as you have self-doubt and all of its attendant fears, you are guaranteed to stay in servitude to your false self. Your ego thrives on guilt. Your higher self knows that you should forgive yourself, learn from mistakes, and release feelings of fear and anxiety. But ego hands you guilt so that it will thrive. Guilt is the inner fear that you should pay a price for any and all mistakes you've committed in your life. Thus the ego convinces you that you must feel guilty, and it keeps you removed from your true spirit. Your ego doesn't reject love. The polite background ego voice whispers that love is a high ideal, but one that is loaded with danger. It warns you to not give too much love because you may be taken advantage of. Because you are so special, it tells you others want to take advantage of you. Ego promotes inauthentic love. In your relationships with others, your ego convinces you that your partner is just what you need to fill the emptiness within you. This is a great ruse that will forever keep you from knowing love and peace. Make a copy of this passage from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Tape it to your mirror and read it every morning. It will help stimulate the inner opening to the love you seek and dissolve fears if you are willing to do what the poet suggests. He says, "I exist as I am, that is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is myself. And whether I come to my own today or in 10,000 or 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness, I can wait." Remind yourself that God created you in perfect love, that is changeless and eternal. As you recognize and affirm this aloud each day, you will lose your fear of inadequacy and incompleteness. Constantly recalling the affirmation of being a creation of God beyond the world of the manifest will chase the fears away. Forgive yourself and welcome love back into your life. I tell people, supposing you went to sleep and you had a dream, and in your dream you had all these different characters, and you had all of this money, and you had everything that you wanted in your dream. And then you woke up. And then you look back at your dream, and you became attached to the stuff that you had in your dream. And you said, wait a minute, I want that. There was gold in there. There was silver. There was all of these friends. I had a Ferrari there. I mean, all of this. I got to have that. Somebody would come away and cart you off and put you in a rubber room and say, that was a dream. You can't be attached to that. That's just a thought that you have. That's the way you got to view life. Instead of it being an 8-hour dream, it's an 80-year dream or a 90-year dream. And at the end of the dream, you don't want to be looking back at all of the stuff that you wish you could still have, because you can't have it. You don't get any of that. So you try to detach yourself now, while you're here, while you're alive, from the need to have that stuff. Instead, you just let it sort of all flow. As absurd as it would be for you to be attached to the stuff that you had in your dream, it's that absurd for you to be attached to the stuff that you're having in this dream. You have to die while you're alive. Now, that's a very hard concept for people to get. But you have to experience your own death while you're alive. Let me tell you a story. It's a wonderful story. It's an old, ancient story. I'll paraphrase it. There was a hunter who lived in India, and he would go to Africa every 2 years, and he would bring back animals and prizes and things like that. Well, one year he took off and he went to the jungle, and he discovered this large enclave inside the jungle, and it was filled with beautiful parrots, beautiful birds, multicolored, and they all talked, and he couldn't get over it. And he put a net out over one of the trees, and he captured one of the parrots. And he put the parrot in a cage. And he brought the parrot back to be with him in India as his pet. And he fed the parrot sunflower seeds, and he fed him rice, and he took wonderful care of him. He was very good, kept him in the cage. 2 years went by, and he talked to the parrot every day. And he said to the parrot, I'm now going back to Africa. Is there anything you would like me to say to your friends back there in the jungle when I'm back there? The parrot said, yes. Tell them that I'm very happy in my cage. Tell them that I am joyful and that I love being in my cage here with you. Just tell them that. The hunter went back to Africa. He went back to the place in the jungle where he had been 2 years before. And he told the story. He said, your friend that I took back has a message for you. And the message is that he is happy in his cage, that he is joyful with me, and that he has no regrets. At the instant of hearing that, a bird on one of the branches keeled over and dropped dead. Dropped dead, stiff. The hunter assumed that he was just filled with sorrow at hearing of what had happened to his friend. So he went back to India, and he told his parrot what had happened. He said, I went back and I did just as you said. And I told them all out there, and at the moment that I told it, apparently one of the parrots was so upset that he'd missed you so much that he just dropped dead. And at the instant that that happened, the parrot in the cage keeled over, dead. His legs went straight up in the air, and he went stiff. The hunter was beside himself. He couldn't figure out how could this happen. And he took the dead parrot out of the cage, opened it up, and threw it out on the woodpile. The instant that the parrot landed on the woodpile, he flew up to the branch. And the hunter said, you tricked me. What is this? I thought you were dead. And the parrot said, my friend was sending me a message. He told me, by his actions, that in order for you to escape from your cage, you must die while you're alive. Okay, now that's an old story. That's an ancient story that's been told over the years. What does it mean? I mean, don't you see that this is a cage? That the whole planet is a cage? If you can just stand back far enough and see that we're still restricted by the limitations placed on us as human beings. We're stuck here, or maybe in our homes, or in wherever we are. We're all in cages. And even though we have more room to manipulate, we may even have a whole planet, we're still sort of in cages. Now, how do you escape from the cage that you're in? You have to die while you're alive. You have to literally experience your own death. All of us have to. All of us are going to die. So why not experience it in advance? And see yourself out of your body, gone, but able to look back at what's going on now. Just like the dream, where you have the dream and you have everything you want, but you're able to look back at it. As you do that, you begin to see the folly, the absurdity of hanging on to anything, of being attached to anything, of needing anything, of telling yourself that I can't be happy if, from the perspective of having died, but being able to look back on it just like the dream. As soon as you can do that, as soon as you can experience yourself formless, dimensionless, form and all of the attendant things that you hang on to become irrelevant. They're not necessary any longer. You have a whole new way of living, a new way of being. I had this really stunning realization one day when I was running, and I saw someone about 30 yards ahead of me who was running. And I was thinking about this concept of the unified life and that we're all one, and seeing the big picture and seeing ourselves as all connected and that we all come from a oneness. And because we're so stuck on our separateness, and I was looking at this runner some yards ahead of me, thinking, how could it be that I am connected to that person? I don't know him. I don't know his name. I don't know anything about him. How could there be any connection between us? It was like this thing dawned on me that I am already an I that is we. In other words, I have many different life forms on me. In my eyelids, I have thousands of bacteria. In my pancreas, in my ears, and all over me, I have like thousands of these different life forms. And yet I think of myself as a singular unit, but I am made up of a lot of life, a lot of stuff that is alive. So if you can get back far enough, again, it's always a question of perspective. If you could leave Earth plane, and you can only do that in thought, and look down and try to see humanity, you would really see one body. I mean, if you could get away far enough, you would see, and it would look, as you get closer and closer and closer, just like as you get closer and closer with a microscope, into a raindrop. A raindrop looks like a raindrop until you start examining it closer and closer and closer, and then you see whole universes within one section of it that have never even had any contact with the other section of it. And so, well, that's the perspective you have to get on us all being connected. We only see it from this very tiny perspective. Now, how you can apply this in your life is just to remind yourself that just because there's a distance between you and somebody else doesn't mean that there's not a connection. That's the beauty of thought again. It wasn't, an hour ago that someone here at the studio said something to me about her father. And I said to her, well, give me your father's address and I'll send him a copy of one of my books. And she said, oh, he would really like that. And then she started talking about her aunt. And she was doing like a little imitation, and it was really funny. And she said, "Oh, my aunt just loves you." And she lives down in Florida. She said, "She loves you." And I said, "Well, get me her address, and I'll send her one too. I'd be happy to." And she didn't say anything at that moment. But then as she came to go to lunch with us, she said, "You're not going to believe this, but my father called right after I talked to you, and he gave me my aunt's address, which I didn't have before." And she said, "Isn't that a coincidence?" And I said, "That isn't any more of a coincidence than that we've been talking about this very thing right here for the last several hours here in the studio in Chicago today. That there is a connection, and that you'll see it when you believe it." And all I suggest to you is that you try it. If you pull into a gas station and somebody is right up ahead of you, and they're parked in a place where you think you should be, and if they were only up at the pump a little further away, then you would be able to be happy and they would be able to be happy. Don't tell yourself that. See them as being exactly where they are, that you're connected to them, and treat them that way, so that you don't treat them with anger. You accept it. It's always acceptance. It's openness and acceptance. What you do is you just pull up in front of them and back your car up a little bit and use that pump. Don't treat that person as if they were separate from you. Treat them as if they were a part of you, because they are. It's just that you can't see the perspective. You will be able to see that perspective. You'll get that when you leave this form that you're so attached to and go into another dimension. You'll see all of humanity as one. You are one of the pieces of this puzzle called humanity. And if you are missing from it, or if you're incomplete, or if you're not in harmony, then you make all of humanity incomplete. And that's exactly how important you are as a person. And if you just start thinking like that, that everybody out there that you run into is somehow, in some way, connected to you, you stop being antagonistic toward them, because you know that if you got antagonistic toward the microbes that live inside the lining of your large intestine and just didn't want them there and said, "Oh, I'm going to do everything I can to get them out of there," that would kill you. You literally need that life, that I, that is we, the self-contained unit that is comprised of all of life. You have to have all of that. It's equally true on a different level for all of humanity. And you start seeing everybody like that. And before long, you'll start seeing the connections. They'll start being there, but only when you believe it.
Do you know your past? Do you know where it is? It's only where you think. Do you know that every relationship you have, close your eyes, just close your eyes, just close them. Okay, where's your husband? Where's your wife? Where are your children, your grandchildren? Where's your ex-spouse? They're all in your mind. Open your eyes. Now they're gone. Close your eyes. There they are again. They're just in your mind. You carry your relationships around in your mind. And if your thoughts about your relationships are on what is wrong, what you don't like, what you hate, what they did to you, that will be your experience. And you will materialize or manifest more and more of that pain into your life. If you look at what you love about them and make that the focus of your attention, that will be the nature of your relationship. It's the greatest secret in making any relationship work. It's so simple. Always focus on what you love, if you want that to expand in your life. When you look at someone that you're in a relationship with, look at what you love, because what you think about is what expands. I'll be talking about that a little bit later on, about not giving energy to the things you don't want, because what you think about is what expands. And if what you're thinking about what you don't want, then more of what you don't want will just keep showing up. It's the only way it works. So now I'd suggest to everybody in this room and everybody listening that you take an eraser to all of the wounds of your past and you just send them away. And don't make them your calling card anymore. And bring the presence of God to those problems. And the presence of God is nothing more than a higher, faster energy. It's all energy. Everything is energy. As Einstein said, nothing happens until something moves. And spiritual energy is just energy that moves very fast and at very high frequencies. And problematic energy is very slow and very low frequencies. And when high, fast frequencies are put in the face of low, slow energies, they are nullified. They dissipate. They can't survive. There's a song that they sing at a lot of the churches that I speak in. It says,
Surely the presence of God is in this place.
It's a great affirmation. Anytime, or the affirmation from A Course in Miracles, I can choose peace rather than this. But surely the presence of God is in this place. Every time that I have a conflict with one of my children or with any place, I just bring that line to bear on what is I am experiencing right now. I just bring that line to bear. Surely the presence. Because there's no place that God is not. As the little child in India in the 7th century, who was an avatar, who was really God in a human form, and everywhere he would go, people would be healed just by being in his presence. Just like St. Francis. He'd be seen in the village, he'd be seen in the valley at the same time. Lights would emanate from his body wherever he would go. And everyone in the village knew that this was a child of God. This was God in their village without the benefit of an ego. This was an egoless being who had shown up in their village, which is what I believe our great spiritual teachers were. Like there's ways to reach highest levels of consciousness. One of them is to take on an ego and then spend a big hunk of your life seeing if you can shed as much of it as you can. Which has been my path. But there's another one where you just show up and you never take on an ego in the first place. There's only been a handful of those in recorded history. And this little child was one of them. And the elders in the tribe knew that this was God in a human form. And they went up to the little boy and they said to him, trying to bribe him, "I'll give you an orange," they said, "if you can tell me where God is." And the little boy, without hesitating, said, "I'll give you 2 oranges if you can tell me where God isn't." It's one of the very fundamental precepts of this entire program, is that there's only one power in the universe, and that is the power of God. And that whenever we see evil, it's nothing more than love going in the wrong direction, away from its source. And all we have to do is figure out a way to get it to turn around and start returning to its source. Because there's only one power in the universe. And every time we think that we are in something that isn't good, like a problem, like disorder, disharmony, disease, discomfort, what we've done is we've used our mind to create a separation from God. And as long as we are moving away from that source, from that spirit, as long as we're moving opposite of that, those problems continue to manifest. But if we can somehow figure out a way to turn around and move back in that direction, we can eliminate it.
Inspiration, your ultimate calling. Introduction. I love being inspired, and I trust that the idea of living an inspired life appeals to you as well. I've written this book with the paramount idea of showing you what I've learned about this magical concept. This is the most personal book I've written in my 35 years as an author. I've chosen to use examples from my own life, that is, those I've experienced firsthand. The personal nature of this book is a deliberate choice. I discovered as I went along that in order to write about such a deeply felt subject as inspiration, I needed to convey what I felt as authentically as possible. Just as one can never actually know what a mango tastes like from another person's description, I wouldn't have been able to adequately convey my familiarity with the experiences of inspiration by citing case studies of others. By writing from my heart and speaking from my heart, I've been able to keep the flavor of inspiration alive here in this program. By the way, if you're interested in why I appear on the cover of this program looking blissfully at a butterfly, you'll find out in the final chapter, How Life Looks When I'm Inspired. As I was finishing this work, I had an incredible mystical encounter with one of God's most fragile creations. In the last chapter, I've described that astonishing experience, along with what your life might begin to look like if you apply the insights offered throughout inspiration. I'm also well aware that I've repeated one theme over and over throughout this work. I decided not to edit out this repetition because I see this program as an instrument for moving you to a place where you truly understand what it means to be in spirit. This oft-repeated theme is, live in spirit. You came from spirit, and to be inspired, you must become more like where you came from. You must live so as to become more like God. One of my favorite mentors and storytellers, Anthony DeMello, was a Catholic priest who lived in India and could convert complex philosophical issues into understandable and simple teachings using the art of storytelling. Here's one of those short tales from a book called The Heart of the Enlightened, in which Father DeMello does such a good job of summing up much of what I want to convey to you about living in spirit here in this program. Quote, the devotee knelt to be initiated into discipleship. The guru whispered the sacred mantra into his ear, warning him not to reveal it to anyone. What will happen if I do? Asked the devotee. The guru responded, anyone you reveal the mantra to will be liberated from the bondage of ignorance and suffering. But you yourself will be excluded from discipleship and suffer damnation. No sooner had he heard those words than the devotee rushed to the marketplace, collected a large crowd around him, and repeated the sacred mantra for all to hear. The disciples later reported this to the guru and demanded that the man be expelled from the monastery for his disobedience. But the guru smiled and said, he has no need of anything I can teach. His action has shown him to be a guru in his own right. I trust that the meaning of this story will become clearer and clearer as you immerse yourself in this program. You have a profound calling back to spirit. It is working right now in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to these words in this very instant. I urge you to heed that calling and come to know the pure bliss that awaits you as you make an inspired life your reality. 1. Inspiration, living in spirit. Chapter 1. Living your life in spirit. When you are inspired, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. That's a quote from Patanjali. In the title of this book, I've deliberately used the word calling to indicate the importance of inspiration as it applies to our lives. There's a voice in the universe entreating us to remember our purpose, our reason for being here now in this world of impermanence. The voice whispers, shouts, and sings to us that this experience of being in form, in space and time, has meaning. That voice belongs to inspiration, which is within each and every one of us. Inspiration responds to our attentiveness in various and sometimes unexpected ways. For example, when I began writing this book, I debated between the two titles, Inspiration, Your Ultimate Destiny, or Inspiration, Your Ultimate Calling. One day, while I was swimming in the ocean, I was going back and forth in my mind, trying out both titles. Still uncertain, when I'd finished my swim, I called Reed Tracy, who's the president and CEO of my publishing company at Hay House, from a payphone to get his opinion about the title. While I waited for him to answer, the word calling appeared on the miniature screen of the telephone. Nothing else, just calling. And then the word began to flash on and off as if it were trying to get my attention. When Reed answered, I told him what had just occurred, and we both agreed on Inspiration, Your Ultimate Calling, for the title of this book and this program. All of this may appear to be nothing more than a silly coincidence, but I know better. We know that there's something deep within us waiting to be known, which we sometimes call a gut reaction to life's events. We have a built-in yearning to seek our inspired self and feel wholeness, a kind of inexplicable sense that patiently demands recognition and action. We might describe it as a mechanism persistently projecting the words destiny or mission or purpose on our inner screen. It's possible to have our daily behavior so aligned with these inner feelings that we unequivocally know what our calling is. In fact, if you pause the recording and check it with what you're feeling at this very moment, my guess is that you'll hear a part of yourself crying out, yes, I want to have more inspiration in my life. I want to know my calling. I think of the word inspiration as meaning being in spirit. When we're in spirit, we're inspired. And when we're inspired, it's because we're back in spirit, fully awake to spirit within us. Being inspired is an experience of joy. We feel completely connected to our source and totally on purpose. Our creative juices flow, and we bring exceptionally high energy to our daily life. We're not judging others or ourselves. We're uncritical and unbothered by behaviors or attitudes that, in uninspired moments, are frustrating. Our heart sings in appreciation for every breath, and we're tolerant, joyful, and loving. Being in spirit isn't necessarily restricted to the work we do or the activities of our daily life. We can be inspired and at the same time be unsure of what vocation to pursue or what activities we want to schedule. Inspiration is a simple recognition of spirit within ourselves. It's a return to that invisible, formless field from which all things emanate, a field of energy that I call intention in my previous book, The Power of Intention. In this program, I'm going beyond an understanding of the inherent power of intention, however, by describing how to live in spirit and hear the voice of inspiration even when we're doing absolutely nothing that we'd call purposeful. This is quite different from being highly motivated. In fact, it's almost the opposite of motivation. My experience with being in spirit. When I'm in spirit, I have a feeling of contentment, but more than this, I experience joy. I'm able to receive the vibrational energies of my source, call them voices or messages or silent reminders, even invisible suggestions or what have you, but they're vibrations of energy that I'm able to align with as I get myself out of the way. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of the world's great geniuses, once remarked, quote, "When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, say traveling in a carriage or walking after a good meal or during the night when I cannot sleep, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come, I know not, nor can I foresee them." End of quote. We don't have to be a genius to know what Mozart speaks of. The same force in a different way is flowing through you and me right now. I've learned to remove resistance to the free flow of this spiritual energy by reminding myself to align with it, or to be in spirit in my thoughts and my expectations. When I sit down to write, my desire is to invite spirit to express through me, and I encourage ideas to flow freely. Like Mozart, I'm connected as if it were to my source in spirit, thinking and expecting to be the instrument of my spiritual source. Ideas flow, and whatever assistance I need just shows up. And, like Mozart, I can't describe how the ideas come, and I can't force them. Staying in spirit seems to be the secret to this feeling of being inspired. I also find that inspiration flows in other areas of my life when my primary mission is like what Michael Berg so beautifully describes in Becoming Like God, Kabbalah, and Our Ultimate Destiny. Quote, "Just as every being is God's business, every being becomes our business as well." Unquote. That is, being inspired necessitates the willingness to suspend ego and enter a space where I want to share who I am and what I have in a completely unlimited fashion. At a recent lecture, for instance, a woman named Rolina De Silva approached me at the break to ask if I'd visited her teenage daughter Allison in the hospital for sick children in Toronto, Ontario. Allison had been hospitalized for many, many months due to a rare disease that's characterized by a breakdown of the lymphatic system. Her intestines had been perforated, so she was unable to process proteins and fats, and her prognosis was dismal at best. As I sat with Allison on my third visit with her, I held her hand and noticed that a scab was forming on the top of her hand from a minor injury brought about by an intravenous injection. Something came over me in that moment, and I looked into the girl's eyes and reminded her that the scab was a gift to her. It indicated that the essence of well-being, our source, was working within her. I reminded her that all she had to do was to summon that same well-being to her abdomen. "You're already connected to spirit," I almost shouted. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be growing a scab over that cut on your hand." When I spoke with Rolina 14 months later, I asked if she remembered that day in the hospital when I held Allison's hand and felt inspired by the scab. Rolina replied that that day was a new beginning for her daughter as something inside of her opened up. Always before, she'd had a blank look on her face, yet she gave off an air of intolerance about the entire process. When the girl realized that she was indeed connected to spirit, evidenced by the presence of the scab forming on her hand, she changed her attitude completely. Today, Allison is back home and actually doing work to raise money for that same hospital where she spent so many months as a critical care patient. If you ever see me speaking on television or in person, you'll notice a little angel pin that I wear, which was given to me by Allison as a thank you gift. To me, this pin is a symbol of the angel that guided me that day to speak to Allison as I did. I know in my heart that when we remember we're always connected to this source and that we can summon the well-being of God, it is then that we're said to be inspired. Whether the outcome is miraculous, as was Allison's, or our physical reconnection to our source is completed through the death of our body, we live out our moment in spirit. It's important to understand that each and every one of us represents God or spirit, revealing itself here and now on our planet. So in what direction are you moving? Being in spirit is a direction we take rather than a destination to be reached. Living our life in spirit requires us to determine that direction, and we do so by noticing our thoughts and our behaviors. Thoughts that are in spirit reflect a vibrational alignment, moving us toward our ultimate calling. And obviously, this is the direction we want to take. Once we begin to observe our thoughts, we realize that there are many times we're going in the opposite direction. When we catch ourselves with conscious effort, we can make a U-turn with new thoughts. For example, blaming something we call evil is thinking in the wrong direction. When we see things in our world that we label evil, what we're really seeing are people moving away from their source, not individuals in the grip of an evil power. To become inspired on a daily basis, we must be able to quickly identify any thoughts that are moving us away from our source and then shift the direction. We need to bring love to the presence of hatred, as St. Francis advised. When we're consumed with thoughts we've labeled as evil, we need to notice that we're headed in the wrong direction. It's difficult to comprehend because we're accustomed to blaming our problems on external forces, such as evil or hatred, but we know better. We can make that U-turn by using the same energy within us that has us traveling away from God. Evil, hatred, fear, and even illness soften with love and kindness when we're in spirit. When we make that U-turn, we make an alignment correction and move back into the space of spirit in our thoughts and actions. A Course in Miracles quotes Jesus as saying, "If you want to be like me, I will help you, knowing that we are alike. If you want to be different, I will wait until you change your mind." Being inspired is truly being like your source. If you're not, then your source is politely waiting for you to do something as simple as change your mind. Chapter 2. Your life before your birth into a body. All bodies emerge from the soul and return to it. The visible emerges from the invisible, is controlled by it, and returns to it. That's a quotation from Lau Russell. This is clearly a purposeful universe with an intelligence supporting its creation and continuing evolution. And we're pieces of that intelligence by virtue of having emerged from it. Consider, for example, that scientific analysis of even a droplet of blood reveals all of the characteristics in our entire body's supply. The percentage of iron in that droplet is proportionately the same as in that which flows through our entire body. So it's easy to agree that the drop of blood is identical to the source from which it was removed. Now think about what happens to that droplet of blood when it remains in the state of separation. It can't fortify or heal us, and it can't circulate freely. Disconnected from its source long enough, it will simply dry up, decay, and disintegrate, even though it contains all of the physical properties necessary to survive that its original source does. I believe that our transition from spiritual source to physical beings made up of particles is similar to that bit of blood in that we contain all of the same properties as our source. But unlike that droplet, we're never completely separated from our source. I know that there are no accidents in a universe directed by a source energy that creates endless real magic in the form of its creations. I know that we agreed to move from the world of spirit into the world of particles and form, to come forth at the exact time that we did, and to leave when we've agreed to do so. I also know that we decided to bring joyful perfection to this world and to share that godlike energy with everyone we encounter here on earth. It's our nature to do so. Our life, before becoming an embodiment of spirit, was exactly like our source. Then we began the transition process and became a tiny fetus intended to spend 9 months developing in our mother's womb. I contend that we've chosen to enter this world of particles and form. In ways that we don't readily comprehend now, we knew what we were coming here to accomplish, and we participated in setting this life process in motion. Why place the responsibility or blame on anyone or anything that's not a part of us? On earth, we've been given the gift of volition, that is, we can choose. So let's assume that we had the same capacity when we resided exclusively in the spiritual realm. We chose our physical body, just as we chose the parents we needed for the trip. And it doesn't seem too great a stretch to believe that we chose this life in concert with our source. The very first particle of human protoplasm intended to be ourself wasn't the architect of our physical being. Instead, it was an aspect of an invisible, formless energy field that was our self manifesting. In the particle and the energy field from which it emanated were the size and shape of our eyes, our legs, our mouth, and so on. So it feels intuitively natural to me to assume that in that field of energy, the very shape of our life was also encapsulated. You see, deep within us lies an awareness of what shape our life is to take. We can hear that voice, the one that wants us to know our calling if we choose. But first, we need to surrender to that divine plan we signed up even before our conception. Our first 9 months in form. Let's take a moment to go back to what took place from the very first moment of your manifestation into a particle, right up until you emerged from your mother's womb. Your embryo became a fetus in a space of total faith and cooperation. It had no demands, since it was simply carried along by the divine forces of nature. The basics of your development occurred without your interference. Your brain developed independent of your ideas about how it should be done. Your heart, liver, kidneys, toes, fingers, eyebrows, and every other feature appeared on a schedule that seems miraculous from this side of the womb. For most of us, it was 9 months in the hands of the source of life inside a woman's womb, who may or may not have been cooperating and welcoming our existence. Whatever energy we needed to grow into that being that we signed up to be flowed directly to and through us. This is true for you, this is true for me, for all of us. How could we have gotten along so well in those first 9 months with only the cooperation of our mother allowing us to develop inside? How could everything we required for the beginning of our human journey be so perfectly aligned with the creative spirit? The seed that we came from was so tiny that millions of them could fit on the head of a pin, and it looked identical to the seed that brings a giraffe, a palm tree, or any other living organism into the world of form. So how did it eventually become you or me? The seed materialized into what we intended to become under the auspices of the creative intelligence, and it flourished with the assistance of that remarkable spirit that's responsible for all of life. The entire process of creation simply unfolded. During those months that we lived in the womb, it's safe to say that we were in spirit. We were allowing spirit to perfectly align without any effort on our part. We were provided for entirely by a life force that none of us can completely describe or explain. We were a little larvae-shaped oozeball that, in a relatively short period of time, became a human being with the apparatus necessary to support life outside of the womb. We can see that there's a force in the universe that's 100% trustworthy, one that we relied upon to get us here. It creates and manifests from a spirit of love, cooperation, beauty, and expansiveness, and it's to this flawless work of spirit that we can return in order to know inspiration. Throughout our life, we continue our development outside of the womb, wherein we rely on the energy of creation to fuel the light of inspiration within us. Now I'd like to share a conversation I was privileged to have with my originating spirit. This is an exercise that anyone can do in their imagination. My imaginary conversation with my spirit before manifesting into a physical particle. Being in a universe that's created and guided by an organizing intelligence that precludes accidents and coincidences, I've always felt that my presence here at this time is a component of that intelligent system. In a powerful experience of hypnosis, I recreated a conversation between my highest spiritual self and my originating source, to which I'm still connected. This one imaginary exchange has been exceedingly helpful to me for the major portion of my adult life. I was conceived on the first day of September in 1939 and born on the 10th day of May in 1940. The day of my conception was the exact same day that Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. 2 days later, World War II was initiated. I was born on the same day that the Nazis invaded and occupied Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and I saw the Holocaust coming. I knew that I was to play a dominant role in reversing the kind of hatred that precipitated the horrendous actions that resulted in the slaughter of millions and millions of people. I came here to teach self-reliance and compassion, just as in an earlier incarnation in the 13th century, when I wandered through Europe and Asia with or as Francesco Bernardone, who later became St. Francis of Assisi, attempting to stop the vicious activities known as the Crusades. My infinite soul was and still is tormented by human beings' inhumanity to their fellow humans and wants to eradicate suffering caused by separating ourselves collectively and individually and using violence to settle disputes. The answer, it seems to me, is to teach others how to connect to their source and stay in this consciousness of love, peace, kindness, and oneness. When enough of us make this journey back to being in spirit, our groups and collectives will reflect the inspiration I'm called to promote in one way or another. As I readied myself to make the shift from an exclusively spiritual being into the world of particles in 1939, I had the following conversation with the creative intelligence I'll call God. God, what would you like to accomplish on this journey you're about to undertake? Me, I'd like to teach self-reliance, compassion, and forgiveness. God, are you certain that this is what you wish to dedicate this entire lifetime to? Me, yes, I can see the need even more clearly now. God, well then I think we'd better put your little ass into a series of foster homes and have you stay there for a decade or so, where you'll learn to experience relying upon yourself, and we'll remove your parents so that you won't be dissuaded from your mission. Me, I'll accept that, but what about my parents? Who will best facilitate my life's purpose? God, you can select Melvin Lyle Dyer as your father, a prisoner, an alcoholic, and a thief. He'll abandon you as a baby and never show up in your life. You'll first practice hating him and seeking revenge, but you'll ultimately forgive him long after he's left his body. This act of forgiveness will be the single most important event of your life. It will put you on the path that you're signing up for. Me. And my mother? What about her? Take Hazel Dyer, Lyle's wife. Her compassion for all of her children will give you an example to follow. She'll steadfastly work herself to the bone to reunite you and your brothers after 10 years or so of her own suffering. Me. Isn't it an awful, cruel fate for my father? God. Not at all. He signed up for this 25 years ago. He dedicated this entire lifetime to teach one of his children the lesson of forgiveness. A noble gesture, wouldn't you say? And your mother is here to show you how true compassion shows up every day. Now get down there and participate in becoming a particle. In the introduction of my book, You'll See It When You Believe It, I wrote about finding my father and visiting his grave in the early 1970s. The facts that led me there defy the laws of logic, and visiting it was the final hurdle I needed to overcome before initiating my writing and speaking career, or the mission I'd signed up for back in 1939. I've also visited the Holocaust sites of Europe and read and reread the history of events that contributed to the hatred that created war. In the 1960s, I worked to bring peace to the events surrounding the horrible Vietnam War, and today my attention is often focused on finding an alternative to the violence and hatred in Africa, the Middle East, and particularly Iraq. My calling is deep within me and has a hold on me. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm probably being guided by what Spirit and I decided at the inception of this journey. One thing I know for certain is that I'm inspired. I've described my personal insight about my calling to encourage all of you to examine your own life, including all of its travails and success, as a necessary experience in order to fulfill your mission. Looking at life from this perspective nurtures the deep yearning within that will beckon you back to spirit. Looking at life from an inspired perspective. As you can see from my own example, it can be a great help to look at your entire life as the unfolding of a plan that you participated in before you even arrived here. By doing so, you shift from blaming others and circumstances to being responsible and feeling your purpose. Whatever shows up in your life then becomes a part of the perfection of this plan. When everything you experience seems unwelcome, for instance, you can search for what you gain from the apparent obstacles. If we can remember that we're responsible for what we're attracting, we can then eliminate the negative energy we wallow in. If what we desire is to be inspired and feel joy, but the opposite keeps showing up, rather than cursing fate, we can view ourselves as simply being out of creative vibrational alignment. We can shift our vibrations in the form of thoughts to those that are more harmonious with our desires, and we can then begin to take the small steps necessary for our inspiration to be sensed. Source energy will cooperate with us when we seek it energetically. Moreover, we can begin to reassess our lives for misaligned attractions and imagined bad luck. When we feel peaceful within ourselves, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. Regardless of what goes on in the world of form, inside of ourselves, we'd still be living in spirit. For example, a beggar on a street corner may have agreed to come into this world of boundaries to teach and generate the awareness that leads to more compassion in this world, or even to teach a single person, perhaps you, to become more compassionate. In an infinite universe, there's no time restrictions on how many lifetimes we get. With an infinity before us, spending one lifetime teaching compassion doesn't seem so outrageous. When we feel peaceful within, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. An inspirational attitude is less judgmental and more appreciative, with a keen eye for how God or source energy manifests. And remember, source can't be removed from what it creates. Everyone and everything contains God or the source, so be on the lookout for the God force in every living thing. Explore how this force has delivered to us many blessings in disguise. We came from a world of pure spirit and allowed that source to take over without any interference or questioning on our part. As long as we were in spirit, our source materialized in a multitude of ways to handle everything for us. Then, almost immediately after our birth into form, we initiated a program to deny spirit and emphasize the ego. But now, as you listen to these words, you're on the threshold of dropping ego identity and returning to a life where inspiration awaits you. Chapter 3. Why we left our full-time spiritual identity behind. Quote, "A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct." Unquote. From A Course in Miracles. I love that. A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct. We now understand that we were created out of spirit, so it must be a part of us. We also realize that for 9 months, we totally trusted in this originating spirit, and all that we needed was provided for. And then we arrived as a pure representation of spirit. So why did most of us trade in the spiritual identity card for one that wants us to believe in things that are non-existent where we came from, such as suffering and fear, anxiety, limits, and worries? The answer lies in understanding why we left behind our full-time participation in the world of spirit. I've used the term full-time to signify that we're always connected to spirit, even when we think and behave in ways that don't reflect spiritual consciousness. What I'm offering here in this program is the awareness that we can return to a full-time position of inspiration, which is the true meaning of our life. Inspiration can be cultivated and be a driving enthusiasm throughout life, rather than showing up every now and then and just as mysteriously disappearing, seemingly independent of our desire. And it's everyone's divine birthright. That is, it isn't reserved for high-profile creative geniuses in the arts and sciences. The problem is that from birth, we're gradually taught to believe exclusively in the world ruled by club ego, and we put our full-time membership in Club Spirit on hold. Our initiation into Club Ego. When we arrive in this physical world, we're immediately cared for by well-meaning folks who've been taught to believe in the illusion of what Patanjali called the false self. They think that they're not defined by the spiritual essence from which they came, but by their uniquely special individuality, their possessions, and their accomplishments. They see themselves as separate from each other, from what's materially missing in their lives, and from God. You can see why the word ego is often referred to as an acronym for edging God out, EGO. Ego, you see, is an idea that we acquire from our clogged environment, which is stuffed full of ego-dominated folks. I'm not using the word ego to describe overly self-important people who thrive on nauseating delusions of grandeur. Rather, I mean it as a catch-all term for defining identification with the false self. Very early on, ego tells us that we're separate from everyone else, directly contradicting spirit, which reminds us that we share the same life force with everyone. Ego nags us to compete and insists that we've failed when others defeat us or have more than we do. And more than anything else, ego fears our living an inspired life because then we'll have no need for it. As we progressed through our developmental years, we weren't trained to stay in spirit. Quite the opposite. We were constantly reminded that we were what we did in life, and failure to accomplish the kind of life that others saw for us meant that we should feel dejected. Our culture wanted us to learn early that we are what we acquire, and if we have or want very little, then we are very little value. Furthermore, we are what others think of us, so if our reputation is sullied, we're of even less value. We were indoctrinated in these lessons by family, church, community, school, the media, and even strangers. These ego-dominated edicts were force-fed to us and allowed to mute the deep inner voice that beckoned us to remember why we're here. Eventually, we learned to ignore those in-spirit murmurs and replace joy, contentment, and bliss with an emphasis that wonders, what's it all about? We opted to fit in, chasing someone else's dream and counting up our earnings and possessions to measure our level of success. The nagging feeling that resulted is the result of relinquishing our true spiritual self as an active participant in this life. But take heart, it never left us and is alive within us today. Ego's dominating messages. We can start returning to being in spirit by examining what ego has accomplished in our life, as well as making a determined effort to resist the powerful pressures of our culture's ego in favor of an inspired life. Ego is just an illusion, so ask yourself if you wish to continue to be controlled by something that isn't true, or would you rather look into what's real and never changes? Keep in mind that spirit is fixed, permanent, and infinite, while ego comes and goes with the wind. To continue on with this discussion, I've adopted the following list from a fascinating book called The Disappearance of the Universe, published by Hay House in 2004 by Gary Renard, which gives an account of two spiritual visitors teaching Gary the significance of A Course in Miracles. Whether you accept the premise or not is your option. I find these teachings to be profound, and they merit consideration. Number 1. The ego says, you're a body. The Holy Spirit says, you're not even a person. You're just like me, your source of being. This teaching shows that our ego insists we're impermanent, which is opposed to our being what Lao Tzu taught, that which never changes. That's what we are, that which never changes. Lao Tzu was a 6th century BC mystical spiritual teacher and author of the Tao. When we think about our life here on earth, we can't avoid the awareness that everything we experience, including our body, returns to dust to be recycled by spirit. Our ego finds this concept impossible to accept. 2. The ego says your thoughts are very, very important. The Holy Spirit insists only thoughts you think with God are real. Nothing else matters. This teaching explains that thoughts centering on ourselves, appearance, possessions, fears, or relationship problems are not only unimportant, they're not real. Ouch! The ego flinches at such commentary. But if we examine these thoughts from Spirit's infinite perspective, we see that we're indeed unreal. When we're totally immersed in Spirit, we only had thoughts of Spirit because that's all we were. When we left it behind, we opted for thoughts that our ego told us were important. A Course in Miracles tells us that we didn't even have to think in heaven because we were thought by God. so we can access permanent inspiration by letting ourselves once again be thought by God and achieve a state of heaven on earth. 3. Your ego says, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away." The Holy Spirit asserts, "God only gives and never takes away." When living an inspired life, we're focused on giving our life away and simultaneously observing how it's returned, thus fortifying the idea of what goes around comes around. Ego is constantly telling us to be fearful about losing what we have and warning us of greedy others who will take what's ours. But God doesn't take away from us. As we learn to think this way, we attract more of what's missing in our life. The reason for this is simple. We become what we think about. If we think about giving, like God does, the universe will provide. If we think about things being taken away, then that's what we'll attract. 4. The ego says, "There's good and bad." The Holy Spirit maintains, "There's nothing to judge because it isn't real in the first place." When we accept the ego identification card, we agree to judge almost everyone and everything in terms of good or bad. The problem with this is that we all contain the same spirit from which we originated. If I make you bad and myself good, for instance, I deny the presence of spirit in you, whom I elected to judge. God sees it quite differently. Our spiritual source knows that only it is real. All of the ephemeral world of form and boundaries is not of its infinite nature. At our core, the place where we all originated from and return to, there's no one and nothing to judge. This takes some time to get used to, but once we grasp the truth of this observation, we're free to tap into authentic inspiration. 5. The ego directs love and hate toward individuals. The Holy Spirit's love is nonspecific and all-encompassing. Ego directs us to love some, be indifferent toward many, and hate all others. When we learn to be back in spirit on a full-time basis, we discover what we knew in our pre-ego time. There's no they. There's only one. The one source of all-encompassing love knows nothing of boundaries, differing customs, geographic divisions, family splits, or differences in race, creed, sex, and so on. It only knows love for all. Jesus points so perfectly to the differences between ego and spirit. When we were in spirit, we were a child of our Father in heaven. And, quote, "He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good." Matthew 5:45. This, of course, means that it's all one. Evil, good, righteous, and unrighteous are all the same. Some move away from the Father and some move toward him. This is such an important and powerful lesson to get as we move toward becoming inspired by living in spirit. 6. The ego devises clever reasons why we should continue to listen to its selfish counsel. The Holy Spirit is certain that at some point we'll turn toward it and ultimately return. Ego will tout its irresistible logic to assure us that our body, our possessions, and our achievements are all very real and important. It convinces us by insisting that what's real is what we can see, touch, hear, taste, and smell. Therefore, invisible spirit isn't real. So ego continues to be attached to stuff and to make the acquisition of money and power a lifelong objective. To that end, it wants us to disdain forgiveness in favor of seeking revenge. Very persuasive logic when we look around and see almost everyone doing just that. Through the lens of inspiration, however, we're able to see how ego has distorted the message of the Holy Spirit. Instead of seeking revenge, we're more likely to see a very sad nation of strivers and virtually no arrivers, a gaggle of pill poppers searching outside of themselves for a resolution to their depressing, anxiety-filled, joyless, and often lonely lives. As we return to the Holy Spirit, we'll no longer be under the influence of ego's absurd counsel. And 7. The ego wants us to regret our past. The Holy Spirit wants us to practice unconditional forgiveness. The Holy Spirit isn't limited by a past or a future. There's only the eternal now. Any energy we place on what transpired in the past is groundwork for guilt, and ego loves guilt. Such negative energy fabricates an excuse for why our present moments are troubled and gives us a cop-out, a reason to stay out of spirit. And thinking about what we've been or what we did wrong in the past are great impediments to an inspired life. On the other hand, when we're inspired, we're totally engaged in the now. In an infinite, never-beginning, and never-ending universe, there can be no past. All guilt and regret simply serve as ways to avoid being here in the only moment we have, which is now. This is where we reconnect to spirit, now. If we choose to use up this holy instant with regrets about a past that's only an illusory thought, then we're unable to be in the joyful, loving, peaceful present moment. Cramming this holy moment with thoughts of guilt, remorse, and regret is great for ego and keeps us totally resistant to being in spirit. These 7 messages are the dominant ones the ego drones on about. If we don't listen, it will try to drown out inspiration by intensifying worrisome and fearful thoughts. I've managed to tame this annoying voice of the ego so that its influence is almost negligible in my life, and I know you can too. How I learned to slay the ego intruder. I realize that the ego's voice has most of us convinced that we're powerless to manage our own destiny. There was a time when I felt much more kindly toward the ego since it plays such a dominant role in the lives of so many people, almost everyone, in fact. But today, I see it as something that needs to be destroyed. I no longer agree that since it's in our lives, we might just as well learn to love and accept it, troublesome as it may be, nor do I believe that it serves some useful purpose. Knowing that we've been created in the image of our Creator, and therefore have the same essence and the same ultimate potential, means that ego is out of the picture. Ego denies our original invisible reality, so it must be removed and completely banished from our awareness. Realizing that ego is a traitor to our greatness is what ultimately set me free of its pull. I keep remembering that ego isn't real, even as it still protests and attempts to delete my feelings of inspiration. My highest self responds with, "But remember, Wayne, what's trying to drag you down isn't real." What also helps to keep me on track is parenting. I'm the father of 8 children, so I can recall thousands of instances of being sucked into a black hole of confusion and uncertainty with my kids. Arguments with them concerning schoolwork, questionable friendships, curfews, staying at a pal's house, dress codes, dating, cigarettes or drugs, what was right from my perspective and wrong from theirs, and vice versa, and on and on and on this list could go. There was anger and hurt feelings, sleepless nights, and of course, much happiness, joy, and contentment as well. As I look back on those years of parent-child conflicts, I realize today, in this now moment, that none of it exists. It isn't real because it's in the changing world of time and space. Similarly, I now realize that every conflict or struggle that exists, as well as those experiences I'd call good and joyful, are not real from the inspirational point of view. So if anything I experience is immediately going to fall into illusion, why not simply stay connected to spirit through it all? While I still have occasions when I slip today, I'm able to say that every conflict I have with my mostly now adult children, or anyone else for that matter, isn't really between me and them. It's between me and God. I look for a way to be like God and stay loving, caring, forgiving, and peaceful within myself, suspending my need to be right and knowing that in the next moment it will all be gone, which is true of everything that's being played out in this illusory world. I want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting that peace means being in a place where there's no noise or trouble. Rather, it means that in the midst of turmoil, I can still feel calm. Not one of the things that I was so upset and out of control over matters today. Not one. It's all illusion fed by my ego's need to make me important by winning, being right, or coming out on top. The best way I can think of to summarize and conclude this chapter in this program is to take you back to the opening quotation from A Course in Miracles. To me, this observation helps us understand why we've left our spiritual identification. Quote, "A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct." Chapter 4. How it feels to return to spirit. Quote, "The aim and purpose of human life is the unitive knowledge of God." Unquote. Aldous Huxley. This much should be really clear by now. We originated in a field of energy that has no boundaries. Before entering the world of form, we were in spirit, a piece of God, if you will. We began entering this physical world first as a particle, then as a cell, then as a fetus, then as an infant, and ultimately as a fully developed human being. But our ultimate purpose all along was to experience the unitive knowledge of God, as Huxley so beautifully puts it. Sadly, when we began our human training, we were taught to abandon most of our spiritual identity and adopt a new one based on ego's consciousness or a sense of being separate from spirit. In other words, we came here from a place of inspiration and intended to stay that way. Unfortunately, we forgot to do so, and we ended up abandoning most of our inspiring notions in favor of a consensus of reality that didn't include spirit. We chose the false self, which is why we so inexplicably feel off purpose so frequently. In the West, traditional psychology hasn't wholeheartedly embraced the existence of Atman, the Godhead within humans, and our psychological and spiritual teachings don't teach us how to achieve the union of perfect yoga. For this kind of learning, we'd have to study with a teacher of yoga or organized religion. Now we'd like to reconnect to the world of spirit, while at the same time not shed the familiar body we've worn for a lifetime. That's where Patanjali's teachings come in. Patanjali was considered a saint in his lifetime, teaching sutras, the essential threads of a philosophy that elevated human beings to their highest potential. He taught about knowing God through the practice of meditation and yoga in order to attain a point of union with the source. He also described our ability to perform miracles. These feats involved specific spiritual aphorisms and the daily practice of yoga. The remainder of this chapter is devoted to my impression of Patanjali's 2,300 or so year-old observation on inspiration. When you are inspired, my personal view of the 6 ideas presented here includes my belief in the existence of a God consciousness within every one of us. And my purpose in the next few moments of this program is to help you achieve this perfect union of yoga and live from this inspired perspective every day. Here's what Patanjali offered us more than 2,000 years ago, which is the most profound statement I've ever found on the significance of the role of our ultimate calling. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Patanjali opens his aphorism with an observation on inspiration and follows it up with 6 conclusions. These 6 key points are the basis for the next few moments in this chapter, as they describe what it feels like when we return to the world of spirit. Number 1, when you are inspired, all your thoughts break their bonds. As I explained earlier, being inspired is equivalent to being back in spirit. Before we showed up in form, our mind and the mind of God were synonymous, which means that we were free from the bonds of the ego mind. This is simply how the world of spirit works. It's impossible to have limiting boundaries or self-imposed shackles placed on us. When we're in harmony with the mind of God, we simply don't have thoughts that tell us we can't accomplish something. After all, our thoughts are of a higher energy. Returning to spirit results in a grand sense of being in tune with our uniquely divine purpose. Just imagine being able to go on and on for hours at a time without experiencing fatigue or hunger or thirst or mental exhaustion, all thanks to one factor, the willingness to be back in spirit. I've personally found that when I have thoughts of being inspired by some great purpose or extraordinary project, I let go of fatigue. That is, being in spirit somehow eliminates thoughts that send the "I'm exhausted" signals to my body. In the middle of writing or speaking or touring with my family or playing a tennis match or anything that inspires me, all bonds are shattered by my mind, and fatigue is impossible. Furthermore, matching up my desires with plans and behavior in the form of my thoughts and actions breaks down the bonds of hunger and discomfort. I've literally written for up to 14 hours without eating or experiencing any hunger pangs. Somehow being inspired allows my thoughts to remove any of the bonds that can serve as excuses not to do what I know I'm here to accomplish. This observation that Patanjali made so long ago is awesome. Why not practice returning to spirit and allowing all thoughts to be in agreement with that originating spirit? Your thoughts will work on your body and surroundings, transforming obstacles into the fulfillment of your desires. 2. When you are inspired, your mind transcends limitations. When we're inspired, we remember that God is always in us and we're always in God, so we're incapable of thinking limited thoughts. We're transcendent. We've gone beyond the world of boundaries and entered a space of creative knowing. In other words, we surrender. We put ourselves under the guidance and control of our purposeful force. I can personally vouch for this surrendering process. During my life, I've had an unshakable faith in my ability to attract money and prosperity. Even as a youngster living in foster homes, I always felt I was entitled to have wealth. I just knew there was an inexhaustible supply and that it was totally neutral, simply an energy that goes wherever it's called to go. I don't know why I've known this my entire life, but I know it even more today. A television interviewer once asked me if I ever felt guilty about making so much money from my writings and recordings. I responded, much to her surprise, I would feel guilty, except that it's not my fault. When she asked what I meant, I explained that money has always come to me because I've always felt within me that I am money. I attract prosperity because I feel entitled to it. In fact, I feel that it's actually a definition of me. Money has always come to me, and because it has, I direct it wherever I perceive it to be needed. It's simply an energy system that my mind has created. It flows to me because it's who I am. I've never doubted that I came from an energy source of pure, unlimited abundance. And because of my unshakable faith, I've always acted on this prosperity consciousness. I've never known a moment of unemployment through good or bad economic times. 3. When you are inspired, your consciousness expands in every direction. When we're in spirit, every direction is possible for us at every moment because our consciousness happens within our mind. Now, this inner world of ours, reunited with its originating essence, doesn't think in only one direction. Rather, it allows all possibilities. Our consciousness is in the absolute state of allowing. All resistance in the form of thoughts is non-existence. I'm speaking here of a feeling that comes over us when we're inspired by a great purpose, an extraordinary project. When we experience the bliss of an expanded consciousness with the unsurpassed allowing of any and all possibilities to enter our daily life. We cease looking for answers in a directional way. They don't come from someplace north or west of us, nor are they arriving from up above or impeded by something down below. We begin to feel the larger sense of life, what being a part of all is like once again. Is there any place that God isn't? And if we came from God, then mustn't we be like God? You see, we're already connected to everything we need when we're inspired. What takes place is a realignment within us that allows for everything, every event, and every person to merge in our inspired consciousness. When we re-emerge into the perfect oneness of spirit, we view everyone we meet as an ally through our inspired way of life. We feel extraordinarily guided and attract people, events, and circumstances to join us in our inspired state because our world has transcended from the elementary cause and effect, birth to death path to all directions simultaneously. We're living at maximum allowing. With non-existent resistance, we're back in spirit. 4. When you are inspired, you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. In 1976, I made the choice to live in spirit on a full-time basis. I resigned from my professorship at St. John's University to teach and write on a much larger stage. I knew within myself that I was finally listening in earnest to the inner voice that chose my destiny before I was conceived. I incarnated here to teach self-reliance and to help our planet move to a more unified means of living heaven on earth. But I was here for 35 years before devoting myself exclusively to my mission. At the age of 36, I was consumed by my writing and by telling the world about my book, Your Erroneous Zones. I was filled with excitement and passion about what I was involved in. I had never felt as complete in my previous 35 years, even though I had an exciting and thoroughly satisfying career teaching and counseling. The moment I resigned from being an employee to living my dream, when I mustered up the courage to be in spirit, lives in my mind even today, some 30 years later. I found myself in a new, great, and wonderful world. It was as if a huge blanket had been removed from me and breezes were allowed to refresh me at every turn I made. The world became my oyster when I shifted into the world of inspiration. Suddenly I began receiving requests to appear on radio and TV shows to discuss what I believed in so passionately. The more I spoke from what I now recognize as inspiration, the more invitations I received. Radio hosts began asking me to fill in, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours on all-night shows, and then for a week at a time in cities across the country. I stayed with my inspiration, loving every moment, working 18-hour days, and being willing to do whatever it took to stay in spirit. Soon national shows took an interest in me, and all the while, precisely the right people showed up to teach and guide me through this process. Publicists, editors, book distributors, talent coordinators, travel agents, bankers, everyone who was needed kept surfacing. All I had to do was stay inspired and follow my bliss, in the words of Joseph Campbell. It was as if a gigantic hand was pulling the right strings. Moment by moment, day by day, I was in awe of it all at the time, and I'm still in awe as I write these words many years later and speak to you today. More than ever, I trust in Patanjali's advice, now, today, to stay in spirit. This is not to say that many obstacles didn't surface, as they continue to today. There are times when I still can't fathom why I have to go through so many difficulties. At the age of 65, I thought I was through with heartbreak, yet I still have it coming at me. A debilitating heart attack, a personal tragedy in my private life, and serious addiction challenges within my family have all been recent occurrences. Despite all the hardships that have surfaced, I've found that all these experiences are valuable because of the compassion, forgiveness, and kindness that I've developed. These so-called negative situations have impacted my writing and speaking and have caused me to reach out to a much larger audience through public television, where I offer a positive, inspired message. My lesson has been to stay in spirit and step outside my body and my life circumstances, to observe all that has and continues to flow to me from a perspective of detachment. It's not about me. It's about staying in spirit, knowing that all that comes my way is a divine blessing, even the struggles. 5. When you are inspired, dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. I know that forces exist to guide me through every stage of this program and all of my writing. When I pick up a book, I often open it to precisely the right page, and exactly what I need appears before me. I smile inwardly and say aloud, "Thank you, God. You're always there for me when I write, seemingly alone here in my dining room and looking out at this magnificent ocean." I love watching those dormant forces come alive and guide me in my own inspired offerings. I so appreciate the talents that's rested within me for so long, coming alive when I do what I know I'm here to do. I certainly couldn't access the forces if I were living at the ordinary level of consciousness that had been laid out for me by external, well-meaning forces. I can only access the dormant forces when I'm inspired. That is, when I let go of my ego demands and re-enter that magical realm of spirit. These dormant forces will come to all of us. They're actually alive and well and have been working on our behalf for as long as we've been here. Yet they appear to be dead to some because they've left behind their divine purpose, which we decided on long before we ever took on the insane ego. And 6, when you're inspired, you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. The act of being inspired by some great purpose allows us to feel the essence of a spiritual being having a human experience, rather than the other way around. Patanjali suggests that we could never even dream of our greatness because we've been imprisoned by our beliefs about who we are. We bought into the idea that we were limited in our ability to create an all-encompassing life, and we were certain that we had no choice in our own destiny. We defended our need to acquire more and to live a scarcity consciousness in which we competed with everyone else for a meager slice of the whole pie. All of these imprisoning thoughts result when we're not guided by spirit. Moving into a state of inspiration removes all of those restraining ideas. As Patanjali notes, we'll discover someone we couldn't imagine because we were incarcerated in ego's jail, imprisoned by what we now recognize from our inspired viewpoint as an illusion. The poet Rabindranath Tagore, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, writes of those who live exclusively in the false identity of the ego. Quote, "He who, in the world of men, goes about singing for alms from door to door, with his one-stringed instrument and long robe of patched-up rags on his back." Unquote. Tagore is describing how limited our thoughts and our lives are when we're not in spirit. As we move toward heeding the ultimate calling, we no longer live exclusively in the world of men. So we know that we all have greatness awaiting us. We need to awaken from the bad dream that has stupefied us in the fog of ego and live from the blissful perspective offered by being in spirit. Remember the words of Michelangelo. The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. When we were in spirit, prior to materializing, our aim was high and our expectations were godlike. reacquaint yourself with that vision and begin living an inspired life. Chapter 5. Finding Your Way to an Inspired Life. Quote, if we examine every stage of our lives, we find that from our first breath to our last, we are under the constraint of circumstances, and yet we still possess the greatest of all freedoms, the power of developing our innermost selves in harmony with the moral order of the universe, and so winning peace at heart, whatever obstacles we meet. It's easy to say this and to write this, but it always remains a task to which every day must be devoted. Every morning cries to us, do what you ought and trust what may be. Johann von Goethe. When I speak about inspiration and purpose, I frequently hear people ask, but what if I don't really know what would inspire me? Or, how do I find my purpose when nothing seems to resonate with me at the level of bliss you speak about? That's why this particular part of this program and the following ones are dedicated to my heartfelt answers to these questions, which seem most bothersome to those who'd really love to heed their ultimate calling. Just the mere act of questioning our ability to live an inspired life represents resistance that we need to examine because it implies that we're deficient in our spiritual quest. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. In the world of spirit from whence we came, there are no deficits, no lacks or shortages, and there's definitely no such thing as purposelessness. This is an intelligent system that we're a part of. We're divine beings who are a piece of the entire pie of creation. By questioning our ability to activate a connection to inspiration, we give evidence of our lack of belief in our divinity. With this minor reproach in mind, I'll now explain ways to believe in and connect with your ultimate calling. First, in order to put to rest any question regarding your personal right to live an inspired life, we must claim our own divinity, all of us. The fundamental truth each of us needs to affirm is, I am a divine creation. All creation has purpose. I am here to be like God. We should tattoo this statement on our consciousness and wear it proudly. We must begin the process of getting in spirit with a firm declaration from which we never waver. Here's a poetic reminder of this truth from Walt Whitman. Quote, perhaps the deepest, most eternal thought latent in the human soul is the thought of God merged in the thoughts of moral right and the immortality of identity. Great, great is this thought, I greater than all else. Unquote. The thought of God merged in the thoughts of moral right. I love that. Yes, as Whitman says, this thought of being merged with God is greater than any we could ever have. Once we've accepted this, we can move on to knowing why we're here and what inspires us. We can begin to trust in the intelligence that beats our heart 50 or 60 times every minute and at the same time turns the earth once every 24 hours, keeps the planets aligned, and creates every millisecond. Our job is to be as much like the source of all beings as we can be. And the nagging question about what inspires us and why we're here dissolves in this grand desire. Once we declare our holy divine nature to be our essence, rather than something to be verified, it all seems so obvious. The journey to feeling purposeful and inspired begins by seeking to be like God in all of our thoughts and all of our actions. I quoted Goethe at the beginning of this chapter because I consider him to be among the most intellectually and spiritually gifted Renaissance men who ever lived. Ponder on his words thoughtfully as you listen to this program, and keep in mind that every one of us is capable of being inspired every day of our life. After all, this is our entitlement, offered by God, with whom we collaborated before ever arriving here in the first place. Blocking the bliss of inspiration. Basically, we have two choices for meeting any problem that seems to be blocking us from the bliss of inspiration. The first is the way of frailty, in which we assure ourselves that we're weak and incapable. Frustration, grief, fears, and tears are the hallmarks of this choice, wherein we attempt to cure a wrong with another wrong. The frailty method multiplies tensions by focusing on what's missing, and often invites the advice of others in an attempt to resolve our inner tension and lack of inspiration. The second choice is to go within and know that at our core, beyond all physical and mental factors, there resides the spirit that's always connected to God. Any problem, and I emphasize any problem, represents our inability to consciously connect to our source in the moment. With a conscious connection, we don't seek the advice of others, we seek information. So our decisions are made between ourselves and our Creator. We frequently have quiet interchanges with God, and we know and trust that spiritual guidance is available as an alignment of energy. When we feel inspired, we recognize that we need to make a vibrational adjustment that puts our thoughts and behaviors back in alignment with the desire to be inspired. Then, when this realignment takes place, we can laugh at the folly of seeking something outside of ourselves, such as an activity or a job, to inspire us. By simply realigning and harmonizing with Spirit, we let inspiration blossom in the field of harmony. Listening to the voice of God. When we make the decision to become a being of sharing and practice keeping our thoughts harmonized with Spirit energy on a daily basis, our purpose will not only find us, it will chase after us wherever we go. Since we've become aligned with our Creator, we won't be able to escape it. You see, when we live as much of life as possible in God realization, nothing can go wrong. What and who we need will surface, and we'll notice that we can't escape feeling that something much greater than our individual life is at work within us and around us. Our number one relationship must be to this creative energy of God. When we go to our source, we activate the energy that reconnects us to our purpose. Inspiration then shows up right before our eyes, even when we may have stopped thinking about it. Our purpose manifests in many ways and won't be limited to a career slot. In fact, it's often something that requires us to leave a particular kind of employment to pursue something we'd never even considered before. We must trust that inspiration is already here. It only eludes us because we've disconnected in some way from the Spirit that was and always will be our essence. I recently received a letter from a woman in Kansas that illustrates this message perfectly. Just out of the blue, she felt compelled to do something that she'd never contemplated before, and voila, she was inspired and remains so today. With Gail's permission, here is her letter, which has been edited for clarity. For more on japa, which is a form of meditation, please refer to my book, Getting in the Gap. Dear Wayne, thank you so much for your presentations and tapes. You are frequently my traveling companion as I drive in my job. I just wanted to add my testimony to the power of japa. I was an on and off again meditator, but realized how much more smoothly my days went when I was on it. I visited Kenya, Africa in June of 2002 and met an 8-year-old orphan girl there. As I sat on the ground, she crawled into my lap and a voice said, "Take her home." I physically turned around, but no one was there. Again the voice said, "Take her home." I asked my 18-year-old daughter, who was with me on the trip, what she thought about my adopting this beautiful child. With the quickness of a sprinter, she replied, "Go for it." When we returned to the States a week later, I realized that if I didn't follow through with this adoption, I'd always regret it. Regret seemed much larger than the task of adopting. I began doing japa each morning, and through a series of miracles, the baby was able to come to this country, accompanied by a newly made friend. Nellie's adoption was part 2 of God's plan. Part 1 had unfolded a couple of years before when I felt guided to sponsor a series of workshops for which I profited $10,000 with very little time or work. And guess what the final cost of adopting Nellie was? The first time I heard the voice, I chose to disregard it and or think it through, making lists of pros and cons. But I couldn't rest until I proceeded with the workshops. That's how I explained to my family that I needed to proceed with adopting Nellie. Obedience had brought abundance into our lives, and now it was time to share that abundance. Nellie has brought the abundance of love and forgiveness into our home. She is truly a treasure. Thank you for sharing your gift of this wonderful meditation. It changed my life and the life of a little girl. Sincerely, Gail Beal, Topeka, Kansas. Gail used her meditation practice to stay connected to her Creator, and when a small orphan child in Kenya crawled into her lap, purpose did indeed find her. Gail calls this God's plan, but she's actually a piece of God. She came from God, so she must be like what she came from. Hence, God's plan is her plan, and vice versa. In her meditation practice, Gail heard a voice. That voice belonged to her highest self, the part that never left Spirit, is always inspired, and can be heard when allowed to come through. It's a voice that lives in each and every one of us. Creating and holding on to our vision. The desire to find our way to inspiration involves creating a vision of living in spirit 100% of the time. Even if we don't have a clue what we should be doing or what our mission is, we need to practice creating this vision anyway. Our inner picture has to be based on our intention to feel good, which is, of course, synonymous with feeling God, good and God. If we made this an inner mantra, I intend to feel good, we can picture ourselves experiencing joy regardless of what's going on around us. We can remind ourselves that whatever we desire is on its way in amounts greater than ever imagined. If we keep this vision uppermost in mind, then before long, the all-creating source will conspire to bring our vision into our physical life. Most important, we'll begin to act on our vision and receive divine guidance. The truth is that we react to the vision we create and hold, and so do all of the cells in our body. So it's vitally important to hold a clear vision of ourselves as deserving of feeling inspired, knowing that it's our ultimate calling, and choosing to be in spirit even when everything around us suggests otherwise. We need to opt to be a being of sharing, living as close to God realization as is possible. The ancient Persian poet Rumi states this so perfectly with the following lines. Quote, "The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind. Its presence is more beautiful than the stars, with more clarity than the polished mirror of your heart." Unquote. Clear your mind of limits and move into spirit, whose presence, as Rumi tells us, is more beautiful than the stars. Here's a question that Ralph Waldo Emerson posed, which I'd like you to ponder before going on to the next part of this program. We are very near to greatness. One step and we are safe. Can we not take the leap? One step. Surely you can take one step for your own inspired greatness. Part 2, The Fundamentals of Inspiration. Chapter 6, Essential Principles for Finding Your Way to an Inspired Life. Quote, "Well, every man has a religion, has something in heaven or earth which he will give up everything else for, something which absorbs him, which may be regarded by others as being useless. Yet it is his dream, it is his lodestar, it is his master, that, whatever it is, seized upon me, made me its servant, its slave, induced me to set aside the other ambitions, a trail of glory in the heavens, which I followed with a full heart. When once I am convinced, I never let go." Walt Whitman. This chapter presents 6 principles that are important to observe as we seek an inspired life. They're a blueprint to refer to as we reconstruct a life in spirit. I'm listing them here and talking about them in no particular order of importance because I believe they're all equally essential. Principle number 1, be independent of the good opinion of others. There are many well-meaning people in our lives who have ideas about what we should or shouldn't be doing. Relatives tend to be specialists in this area. If we let them guide us with advice that isn't congruent with our inner calling, we'll suffer the anguish, the slings and arrows, if you will, of an uninspired life. Each of us can feel what we're being called to be. When we pay attention, we can hear our own impatient voices coaxing us to pay attention and complete the assignments we brought with us from the world of spirit. But when we allow the opinions and dictates of others to determine what we're doing or what we're going to be, we lose sight of our objective to live an inspired life. We need to determine for ourselves exactly how much we've allowed others to decide issues such as what we do, where we live, with whom we live, and even how we're treated. We must know that absolutely no one else truly knows and feels what we're here to accomplish. So we must give ourselves permission to hear our inner guidance and ignore the pressure from others. Regardless of how absurd our inner calling might seem, it's authentically ours and doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. The willingness to listen and act on our inspiration, independent of the opinion of others, is imperative. Principle number 2, be willing to accept the disapproval of others. Logically following the previous principle, this one notes that we're going to incur the disfavor of many people when we follow our inclinations to be in spirit and live the life we came here to live. This isn't a selfish or cynical attitude. When we begin to follow our ultimate calling, there will be a lot of resistance. In fact, the purpose of the slings and arrows sent our way is to get us to change our mind and be reasonable, which translates to, do it my way. However, as we gain the strength to ignore the pressure to conform, resistance will diminish and ultimately change to respect. When we steadfastly refuse to think, act, and conform to the mandates of others, the pressure to do so loses its momentum. All we have to do is endure some initial disapproval, such as dogmatic persuasion, anger, pouting, silence, and long-winded lectures, and then we're on our way to inspiration rather than frustration. The people who receive the most approval in life are the ones who care the least about it. So technically, if we want the approval of others, we need to stop caring about it and turn our attention to becoming an inspired being of sharing. One little note of caution here. When we raise our children according to these principles, and they observe us living them on a daily basis, we'll have to deal with their determination to respect their inner calling. For example, when my daughter Summer was about 11 years old and I asked to see her report card, I was a bit taken aback by her response. "Why do you want to see it?" she asked me. When I said, "Well, I'm your father, and I think I should know how you're doing in school," she just matter-of-factly replied, "But these are my grades. They're not yours. And if I thought you needed to see them, I would have shown them to you already." I assure you that she wasn't being disrespectful. She simply had no need to share her grades with me. And since I knew that she was doing very well in school, I let it go and let her be who she wanted to be. Principle number 3, stay detached from outcomes. Inspiration doesn't come from completing tasks or meeting goals. In fact, that's the surest way to have it elude you. Returning to spirit, you see, is an experience of living fully in the present moment. Our purpose in life isn't to arrive at a destination where we find inspiration, just as the purpose of dancing isn't to end up at a particular spot on the dance floor. The purpose of dancing and of life is to enjoy every moment and every step, regardless of where we are when the music stops. Yoga Master Sri Swami Sivananda offered the only worthwhile goal I know of when he said that the goal of life is God realization. Now here's a goal that I can live with. After all, this allows me to live in spirit every moment of my life, while simultaneously thinking ahead to the next God-realized moment and the next. As the great Indian sage Ramana Maharshi once remarked, "There is no goal to be reached. There is nothing to be attained. You are the self. You exist always." Now this, to me, is real inspiration. While I was writing the book, Inspiration, Your Ultimate Calling, I didn't really have a goal in mind. I just trusted that the book would be completed. I'd seen it. Even though I was months away from the final product, I lived in the bliss of creating right then, right now, in the moment, and I relished every one of those moments. I trust that the outcome will be handled by the same source that inspires these words to appear seemingly out of nowhere. I'm here, now, in peace, in love, and in awe. And my only goal as I was writing was to stay in this consciousness and enjoy every moment, putting into practice what I agreed to when I was in spirit before coming the particle that began this glorious, glorious journey. Principle number 4, know that we need nothing, no things to be inspired. We came into this world of boundaries from a formless energy field of spirit. We arrived here with no thing. No things. We'll make our exit with no things. Nothing. And our purpose, God realization, requires nothing. No things. We are all that we need to be inspired and living on purpose. And the things that continue to flow into our lives are just symbols of the unlimited abundance of our source. In other words, these things have no value in and of themselves because everything in the physical world is changing and will dissolve back to nothingness anyway. The objective universe is not made up of things. It's made up of waves of motion that simulate the things we're taught to believe are real. Once we accept that, from an infinite perspective, everything we see in nature isn't really what it seems to be, we're able to convert what we view with our eyes into a knowing about all things. Then we can recognize that the objects we believed we needed to feel inspired are nothing from Spirit's perspective. This is what distinguishes the physical person from the spiritual person, the inspired person from the uninspired person. When we tune in to what we know rather than what we see, we immediately find that every thought of God is repeated throughout the universe. We can watch as some things enter our lives and others leave, all the while remaining in spirit, knowing that all of those things have nothing to do with our state of inspiration. We need nothing more to be inspired, since we're connected to spirit already. The ancient Persian poet Omar Khayyam offered us these words, which summarize this principle that we don't need another thing to be inspired. It's all right here, right now. He said, "Forget the day that has been cut off from thy existence. Disturb not thyself about tomorrow, which has not yet come. Rest not upon that which is no more. Live happily one instant, and throw not thy life to the winds." Principle number 5. Don't die wondering. This principle is extremely important in working toward an inspired life because it motivates us to act. After all, we don't want to be full of regrets because we failed to heed our ultimate calling. Attempting to do something, even if it doesn't succeed, is inspiring because we don't tend to regret what we do, we regret what we didn't do. Even following a futile attempt, we're inspired because we know that we gave it a shot. It's wondering whether we should or shouldn't try something that leaves us feeling stressed and incomplete. When I'm playing a tennis match and being tentative in anticipation of losing a point, for example, I've created a situation in which I'll wonder what kind of a game it would have been had I really gone for it. It's in these moments that I remind myself, Wayne, don't die wondering. Inspiration has nothing to do with whether we win or lose. In fact, if we just play the game of life, we'll have plenty of wins and losses regardless of our talent level. If we fail to even try because of fear of rejection or doubt about our talent, we're going to go through life wondering, and that's what keeps us from finding and feeling inspiration. Most of us, myself included, can remember the intensity of our first romantic attraction, just as we can recall what happened when we didn't follow our inspiration. I've always wondered what would have happened if I'd been able to act on that strong inner call in high school when I had an enormous crush on a beautiful girl named Janice Nelson. I wanted to ask her out, but I let my fear of being rejected keep me from taking the steps to act upon my inner desires. On several occasions, I even dialed her phone number and hung up when she answered. I never overcame my foreboding thoughts and, in effect, was left to die wondering. Many years later, I danced with Janice at our 30-year high school reunion and told her how I felt back then. I even confessed the way I'd hang up the phone because of my trepidation. Janice, to my everlasting delight and chagrin, said, "I always had a crush on you, too. I would have loved to have gone out with you, and in fact, I tried to leave you clues to call me, but you never did." Ouch! That's a perfect example of regretting what I didn't do. Principle number 6, remember that our desires won't arrive by our schedule. There's an ancient aphorism that goes, if you really want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. In essence, this means that all we desire will arrive in our life when and only when we're aligned vibrationally with the energy of our source. Our ego won't be consulted or get to determine the schedule. Creation reveals its secrets when it's good and ready. Our job is to take the focus off of the when and put it on being connected to our originating spirit. Our job is to stop challenging and demanding responses from God and instead be more like God. Our job is to understand and accept that all of the things that show up in our life, which we often find contradictory or troublesome, are there because we've attracted them. And we need to have these obstacles in order to clear an opening for our true spirit purpose to emerge. This may require a change in thinking patterns, which is something Tom Barber knows all too well. Tom is the head golf pro at Griffith Park in Los Angeles and owns and operates the Tom Barber Golf Center in Southern California. His father, Jerry, was the PGA champion in 1961. Tom is a close friend whom I can talk to straight about virtually anything. For example, he once admitted to me that business had fallen off and he was concerned about a deterioration in income due to fewer customers golfing in an economy on the downturn. He'd gone on for about as long as I was willing to absorb this kind of energy when I finally said, "Tom, you're approaching the whole issue from a perspective that almost guarantees that this financial headache will continue to grow. Try affirming, what I desire is on its way. It will arrive precisely on God's timetable, not on mine. Everything that I'm experiencing now is disguised as a problem, but I know that it's a blessing. What I desire is on its way, and it's coming to me in amounts even greater than I can imagine. This is my vision, and I'll hold on to it in a state of gratitude no matter what." I received a letter from my friend about 2 months after our conversation in which he wrote, "Thanks for the pep talk. Once I started to say that the business I'm seeking and the finances I need are on their way, everything started to turn around. What happened is that Tom decided to align with the unrestricted abundance of spirit energy." As you can see from Tom's example, rather than making demands of God to follow our schedule in order to feel inspired, we can let go, surrender, and remind ourselves that all is in divine order. We're much more successful when we allow inspiration to flow in on God's terms than when we're impatient and demanding. As always, our job in God realization is to become more like God. That means surrendering to the timetable that's always perfect, even when it seems to be full of errors. Keep these 6 principles handy and access them anytime you find yourself lacking inspiration. Remember, too, that we're called to this world of inspiration, which beckons us to let go and let God, as they say in the recovery movement. I also love this advice, which was tendered by one of my favorite teachers, Napoleon Hill. If you can't do great things, do small things in a great way. Don't wait for great opportunities. Seize common, everyday ones and make them great. Chapter 7, Inspiration and Your Own Magnificence. Quote, "What is necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself." Unquote. Abraham Maslow. Second quote, "You are a primary existence. You are a distinct portion of the essence of God and contain a certain part of him in yourself. Why, then, are you ignorant of your noble birth? You carry a God about within you, poor wretch, and know nothing of it." Epictetus, a former Roman slave and philosopher. In this chapter, we'll look at our divine magnificence and examine the ways in which we can view ourselves in these terms for the rest of our lives. How would we think and act in daily life if we were truly aware of our divine essence? Obviously, there wouldn't be room to reproach yourself because we wouldn't doubt our abilities. In fact, we'd never look in the mirror and feel anything but love and appreciation. We'd see ourselves as fully capable of attracting all we desire. We'd treat our body with reverence and care, giving thanks for its divine design. We'd celebrate every thought we have, knowing its divine origin, and we'd become aware of our enormous talents and be awed by all that we are. We need to encourage the awareness of our magnificence in every regard. When that awareness has been reawakened, the seedlings of inspiration will begin blossoming. Here's a way of expressing these fundamental truths offered by the writings of the Baha'i Faith. "This most great, this fathomless and surging ocean is near, astonishingly near, unto you. Behold, it is closer to you than your life vein. Swift as the twinkling of an eye you can, if you but wish it, reach and partake of this imperishable favor, this God-given grace, this incorruptible gift, this most potent and unspeakably glorious bounty." There's no way to be in spirit without a changed awareness. So when we accomplish this, we give ourselves the gift of moving from being flawed, limited, lacking, and imperfect to being completely comfortable with our magnificence. This unspeakably glorious bounty is so close to us, all we have to do is make a few twinkling-of-an-eye adjustments. So why not begin right now? Here are 3 of the most obvious and important changes in awareness that you can make. 1. Changing the awareness of our magnificent talents and abilities. I want to emphasize an extremely important point. I'm not talking about self-esteem here, nor am I referring to levels of confidence. Rather, I'm saying that we need to keep the important question, "Who am I?" in the forefront of our mind. This question doesn't revolve around previous life experiences, has nothing to do with what we've been told our special qualities or unique abilities are, and it isn't related to how worthy or worthless we feel about ourselves. It has to do with a simple truth. As Epictetus, a philosopher in the 1st century AD, said, "You carry a God about within you, poor wretch, and know nothing of it." Just like Epictetus, who was born into slavery yet became one of our most profound teachers, we came into this world with an inexhaustible supply of talent. Our abilities are as limitless as God's are, because we're a distinct portion of the essence of Him. And there's an infallible way to begin entertaining those abilities and creating as He does. that way is to become aware that anything that excites us is a clue that we have the ability to pursue it. Anything that truly intrigues us is evidence of a divine, albeit latent, talent that's signaling our awareness. Having an interest in something is the clue to a thought that's connected to our calling. That thought is a vibration of energy in this vast universe. If something really appeals to us and we feel excited but perceive ourselves as devoid of the talent we think is necessary, it's probably an even higher vibration. Anything that's causing excitement within us is evidence of a spirit message that's saying, you can do this. Yes, you can. If we react to this message with anything other than, you're correct, I can do this, I have the ability to do it, then we've selected the vibration of resistance and ignored the vibration of excitement and interest that spoke to us. Our thoughts about who we are, what excites us, and what we feel called to be and do are all divinely inspired and come with whatever guidance and assistance we'll need to actualize these goals. The decision at this point is, are we willing to listen to these divine thoughts that pique our interest, or do we go on listening to the false self that's made us what Epictetus called a poor wretch? Rather than case studies of which I have only second-hand knowledge, I'm going to use some examples from my own life that illustrate listening to the false self. My background would appear to be an unlikely one for what I'm calling magnificence. Here's what it would look like on paper. Fathered by an alcoholic who abandoned his 3 children, childhood years spent in foster homes, a classic underachiever, educated in public schools, grew up at the low end of the socioeconomic scale, no financial advantages, no examples of or ambitions for higher education, 4 years as an enlisted man in the United States Navy, admitted to a university on a provisional acceptance at the age of 22 due to lower than average grades in high school, worked his way through 3 advanced degrees by being a cashier and a stock boy in a grocery store in Detroit. This isn't exactly what you'd call a prescription for becoming the best-selling author of 28 books and a successful public speaker. I couldn't begin to tell you how many teachers of creative writing and speech gave me low grades for my efforts in these fields. All I can say for certain is that I've always had a knowing about my interest in writing, have always been excited by the prospect of entertaining and informing an audience, any audience. By all of the accepted standards, I didn't have any writing ability. What I did have, and still do, was an interest and a passion for writing. It inspired and thrilled me, and I simply loved it. From the perspective of inspiration, I had the ability to do it, and that's all I needed to know. Then as now, I trusted that the universe would handle all of the details, including, will I be published? Will the critics approve? Will my book be a bestseller? Will my mother approve? Will I get an apology from any of my old English teachers? But really, who cares about any of this? The fact that writing excites me is all I've ever needed to know. When I follow that thought and stay with it, I conclude that I have the ability and the talent. And so do you. Like me, it's easy to find what excites you. What do you find intriguing? Does learning yoga and becoming an instructor interest you? Then you have your answer. The issue isn't about ability, it's about being matched up in spirit with your current thoughts and behaviors. I still remember the excitement I felt at being admitted to a doctoral program, despite the fact that no one in my family had ever entertained such a possibility, and I didn't know one single person who had entered, let alone completed, an advanced degree program. I was excited beyond what I can convey to you here. I knew that whatever I needed in the way of ability and talent would be there. So how about you? Do you live with resistance, or do you allow your enthusiasm and excitement to be a vibrational match to what intrigues you? Keep in mind that as one of God's glorious thoughts, you've originated out of an energy field that knows only possibility. So stay in vibrational harmony with this idea and know that your thoughts, which emerge as interests, excitement, inner thrills, and illuminating sensations, are indications that you have the necessary ability to merge with your magnificent creativity. You came from magnificence, and you are magnificent still. 2. Changing the awareness of our magnificent physical presence. In the previous section, we answered the question, who am I, in spiritual rather than physical terms. Now let's ask a similar question regarding our physical body. Even though we've been living in it ever since we began as an embryo, it's still relevant to ask, what is this body that emerged from spirit? Our body, your body, is made up of chemicals, Far too many for me to elaborate here, but some of them are iron, magnesium, calcium, nitrogen, hydrogen, and on and on and on goes the list. These chemicals are part of a finite supply here on Earth, so what flows through our veins is part of that finite supply. To that end, the iron that's in our blood was once somewhere else, perhaps in a dinosaur, in the body of Jesus, or in a mountain in Afghanistan. And now it's in our body. And when we leave our body, our iron supply will reside someplace else on Earth as a part of that finite supply. In other words, our entire planet is made up of the exact same chemicals that constitute our physical makeup. Chemically speaking, there's no difference between humans and rocks, trees, orangutans, or distant stars. Grind them all up, and their chemical composition isn't what distinguishes one from the other. Our physical presence is a spiritually directed conglomeration of a hodgepodge of chemicals, and the end result is that we're being made up of the same stuff that makes up the stars. We're made up of stardust, that's right, the stuff of dreams, twinkling, magical, beautiful, light-filled stardust. Remember that the spirit from which we originated can create anything, including worlds. So why would it choose ugly or unattractive creations? We're here in the perfect body for our time here in this incarnation, and it's a living, breathing miracle in every way. It's guided and being directed by an invisible force that directs everything and everyone in the universe. It beats our heart, it digests our food, it circulates our blood, it grows our hair, and repairs our cuts and bruises, all independent of our opinion about it. Living in spirit means that we see our body with all of its unique characteristics and feel thankful for the perfect temple that's temporarily housing our true primary existence. If it's short or tall, bald or hairy, stumpy or slender, extend loving appreciation to it every day. If it can't see or hear, resides in a wheelchair or a hospital bed, has crooked teeth or only 3 toes, whatever, love this collection of stardust. A prayerful thought might go like this: I think of my body as a piece of the eternal, an individualized expression of God. I live in spirit, inspired, because I'm the same as the loving energy that created me, which is perfect. Think about the logic of what I'm saying here. Obviously, we can't live a life of inspiration if the physical shell we take with us everywhere is perceived as anything other than a divine, perfect creation. Our attitude toward our body, along with how we feed and exercise it, must match up with spirit. We came from love, so we must extend that love and appreciation to our body at all times in order to be genuinely inspired. 3. Changing the awareness of our magnificent personal history. This third and final element of our inspirational magnificence is perhaps our greatest challenge. How can we look upon all that we've done or failed to do and view it through the lens of our magnificence, especially when we've been trained to feel shame and self-reproach as a result of our perceived failures or flaws? We've all reacted to situations in the past in ways that we wouldn't want to today. I personally have done many things that I wouldn't choose to repeat, yet every recovering or recovered addict looks back with gratitude for the experience that brought him or her to a higher, more loving, sober place. As I've said in other places, true nobility is not about being better than someone else. It's about being better than you used to be. Every single experience in my life, right up to this day, was something I needed to go through in order to get to be here now, writing these words. What proof can I offer for this assertion? It happened. That's all the proof I need. As we look back on our life, we've failed at nothing. All we've done is produce some results. It's imperative that we send love to those who were hurt by us and forgiveness to ourselves to heal our inner agony. We can then view it all as what we needed to experience in order to get to a higher place. One thing I've learned in my 65 years is that virtually every spiritual advance I've made toward a higher, closer alignment with God energy has been preceded by some kind of a fall from grace. Such mistakes, in quote, allow me to write and speak from a more compassionate stance. That is, they always seem to provide me with the energy to propel myself to a higher place. Truly, I bless all of these failures, in quotes, because I know I needed to go there in order to get here. Be gentle and forgiving with yourself. Abandon any and all shame, and refuse to engage in any self-repudiation. Instead, learn from Leo Tolstoy, who said that the most difficult thing, but an essential one, is to love life, to love it even while one suffers, because life is all, life is God, and to love life means to love God. So love life, every moment of it, especially your blunder-filled past. Dr. Abraham Maslow, perhaps the most influential person in my life many years ago, is quoted at the beginning of this chapter as saying, "What is necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself." Consider how you might want to follow his advice. You can never be mediocre because you are magnificent in every way. So seek ways to change your awareness of yourself so that you're fully aware of your magnificence and can become receptive to inspiration, your ultimate calling. Chapter 8. Inspiration is simple. Quote, "I have lived long enough to learn how much there is I can really do without. He is nearest to God who needs the fewest things." Socrates. 3 keys to keeping life simple. While the theme of this chapter is that inspiration is simple, this doesn't mean that we should sit around doing nothing, waiting Spirit's arrival. Instead, it means having faith that our spiritual connection flourishes in a life dedicated to joy, love, and peace. If our daily activities are so overwhelming that we don't make these 3 things our priority, then we're disregarding the value of living a simple life. Let's now look at each simple key in more detail. Joy. A hectic schedule crammed with non-purposeful activities precludes an experience of inspiration. For example, when we accept obligatory committee assignments or board appointments, requests to write on subjects that don't inspire us, or invitations to gatherings we don't want to attend, we feel joy draining from our body and our spirit. Our life must be open to Spirit's guidance in order for us to feel inspired. When the calendar becomes frenzied, full of unnecessary turbulence because we fail to simplify, we won't be able to hear those long-distance calls from our source, and we'll slip into stress, anguish, and even depression. So whatever it takes to feel joy, we simply must act upon it. Regardless of our current station in life, we have a spiritual contract to make joy our constant companion. So we must learn to make a conscious choice to say no to anything that takes us away from an inspired life. This can be done gently, while clearly showing others that this is how we choose to live. We can start by turning down requests that involve actions that don't correspond with our inner knowing about why we're here. Even at work, we can find ways to keep ourselves on an inspirational agenda. For example, during my years as a college professor, I recall being asked over and over to partake in activities that didn't correspond with my own inspiration. So I devised a simple solution. I took on more teaching assignments, and in exchange, my colleagues attended curriculum meetings, served on research committees, and wrote building improvement reports. I consistently listened to my heart, which always demanded joy. Keep in mind that it's only difficult or impossible to accomplish joy when we engage in resistant vibrational thinking. If we know that we don't have to live a life stuffed with non-joyful activities, then we can choose the way of inspiration. Opting for joy involves giving ourselves time for play instead of scheduling a workaholic nightmare. We deserve to feel joy. It's our spiritual calling. By giving ourselves free time to read, to meditate, to exercise, and walk in nature, we're inviting the guidance that's waiting patiently to come calling with inspirational messages. The bottom line here is that we can simplify life by cutting down on the busy work that keeps us off purpose. We must curtail such activities and listen to Spirit, staying aware of joy and how simple it is to access. Love. Thoughts or actions that aren't tuned to love will prevent inspiration from getting through to us. We need to remember that we came from a source of pure love. So a simple life means incorporating that love as one of the 3 mainstays of our material existence. On the fateful day of September 11, 2001, what stuck in my mind were the cell phone calls made by the people on the ill-fated planes. Every single call was made to a loved one to connect back in love or to express final words of love. No one called the office or asked their stockbroker for a final appraisal of their financial status, as relationships that weren't love-based didn't enter the thoughts of those who knew they were leaving this physical world. Their top priority was to be certain to close out their lives in love. Tell the kids that I love them. I love you. Give mom and dad my love. Just as love is the priority in the final moments of life, so it must be as we simplify life now. We can go toward a clearer life by examining and purifying our relationships with those we love, with ourselves, and with God. What we're looking for are connections that keep us in an energy of love, which is the highest and fastest energy in the universe. Peace. I know that having inner and outer peace is simply crucial for me. I eschew turmoil, conflict, and agitation, and remove myself from these non-inspiring elements at every opportunity. After all, I can't be the spiritual being I desire to be or live in God realization when I'm engaged in any form of bedlam. Somehow, I've been directed to maintain the peacefulness I crave by having those dormant forces Patanjali spoke about earlier in this program work for me throughout my career. Many people who have a similar semi-celebrity status as myself are surrounded by a long list of people who orchestrate virtually every aspect of their lives. I, however, have chosen a simpler route, and the universe has responded by sending me a very few individuals who've supported my desire for peace. I'd like to spend the rest of this section telling you about each one of them so that you'll have some clear illustrations of how these wonderful people have helped me stay in spirit. Years ago, I realized that I needed help in managing the affairs of my growing enterprise, yet the idea of agents, business managers, advisors, attorneys, accountants, mediators, bodyguards, personal trainers, and any number of people to represent me seemed beyond my tolerance level. Many of those who do what I do, even on a smaller scale, have a large entourage of personal attendants for all manner of duties and activities. And I've had these contemporaries complain to me about being burdened with all of their representatives and spending more than they take in to support the services of all of these individuals. This is not my way. In fact, I have one person who handles almost all of my requirements. One day, while I was running a training session for a marathon, God sent me the perfect person to handle so many of my upcoming unforeseen pressures and requirements in the form of a woman who'd left high school in a foreign country to come to America with her 2 daughters. She doesn't have any fancy degrees or specialized skills, but what she does have is a heart as big as the sky, fierce loyalty, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to learn with on-the-job training. Originally from Finland, but now a U.S. citizen, Maya Labos is the ultimate definition of a multitasker. In 3 decades, she's never said, "I can't do that, it's not my job." She manages every request, answers my mail, books all of my talks and my appearances with the media, takes me to and from airports, maintains my personal privacy by deflecting low-energy requests, and deals with the hundreds of appeals I get for endorsements and writing requests. Yet she also handles innumerable tasks, including grocery shopping, vitamin purchasing, office tidying, or bringing clothes to the cleaners. I can count on her to take care of everything and anything I need. When I met Maya almost 30 years ago, she was completely broke. Today she owns her own home by the ocean and is my best friend, confidant, and associate. You see, when we're open to matching up our desire for peace and simplicity with the peace and simplicity from which we originated, God sends what we need. In my case, I got an entourage of one to handle what myriad specialists can't do for so many of my contemporaries. Every writer needs an editor. Almost 30 years ago, God saw this and sent one to me in the form of the enormously well-read and competent Joanna Pyle. She's been my one and only editorial person for the 28 books I've written. I don't submit to editorial boards. Joanna does for me what many writers ask for from their team of editors, editorial assistants, line editors, rewriters, revisers, amenders, annotators, and so on. I want to keep it simple, and Joanna knows how I write. She's also the only person who can read my scribbles since I write in longhand. As the computer age dawned on the publishing world, Joanna trained herself to meet these newly emerging technological requirements. She didn't ask me to write on a computer or to change anything. She knows my desire for simplicity and peace, and she accommodates me perfectly. When I finish a chapter, I send it to Joanna with complete trust that she'll edit it in such a manner that it will be consistent with my original intent. She transcribes it, types it, reorganizes it, and computerizes it, all with a smile and genuine gratitude for being able to fulfill her purpose. Joanna is me. I am Joanna. Once I was able to convince her to leave her non-fulfilling employment as a flight attendant and pursue her bliss as an editor full-time, she was finally able to feel the joy and peace that comes from matching up her energy with her desires. She lives inspiration, and she allows me to do the same. I only employ one individual who handles any and all matters related to the complexities of taxes, particularly where foreign royalties are concerned. I don't use a team of legal experts who charge by the hour or tax consultants who receive as much as what I owe the government. One man, Bob Adelson, knows my desire for peace by keeping it simple, so he organizes everything for me. He works diligently and thoroughly, doing what he loves, and I treasure his presence in my life. In 1976, after Your Erroneous Zones was published, I decided to move from New York to Florida. I knew absolutely no one in my new hometown, yet I needed an investment person whom I could trust to help me with the bonuses I'd received from the success of my first book. Having been a teacher and university professor before this point with no experience in or money for investing, I knew practically nothing about this world. While contemplating how to start an investment portfolio, I pulled into a gas station, filled my tank, and drove away without realizing that my wallet, which contained $800 in cash, had fallen out of the car and was lying next to the pump. Just a few hours later, a man called to tell me that he'd found my wallet, including the cash. I went to meet John Darling, who was my angel sent from God to take care of all of my investments for the next 29 years, and he continues to be one of my very best friends and confidants. When I needed someone I could trust, the universe sent me a stranger who returned my $800, and I've never had a moment of non-peace regarding investments in the past 3 decades. John has managed it all for me, always keeping in mind how I like things to be simple, risk-free, and uncomplicated, knowing what my ultimate investment objectives were and what I desired for my family. I left a large, prestigious New York publishing firm to work with Hay House, mainly because everything in the Big Apple was becoming way too complex. My former publisher employed wonderful people, but the company was too big. It had too many tentacles, too many unkept promises, and way too many departments that weren't in harmony with each other or with me. I felt that too often I was being told it's not our fault. The fault is over there in finance, or over there in marketing, or over there in distribution. It was like a 20-headed monster. I voted once again for tranquility and simplicity, and once again God sent me a gift, this time in the form of the president and CEO of Louise Hay's publishing company, Hay House. When I met Reed Tracy, we clicked almost immediately. This man, who's unafraid to roll up his sleeves and unload trucks even though he's in an executive position, promised me personal attention, and he delivered. We talked every day about a publishing company that didn't get so big that it forgot to take care of its authors. Reed promised me no large conglomerates and said, if you have a desire, make it known to me, and I'll act on it. I loved the lack of complications, since I didn't wish to be in a large business labyrinth any longer. Simplify, simplify, simplify. It has been a glorious experience for both Reed, whom I now consider one of my closest friends, and myself. I wanted peace as a writer, and Louise Hay, whom I've long admired, and her fine president have allowed me to create in peace. As you can see, I've chosen to allow the world of spirit to send me those individuals who have helped rather than hindered me. Without these fine people and their treasured friendship, I wouldn't be able to be here in Maui, playing tennis, doing yoga, walking on the beach. But mostly, I'm able to write from my heart and do it in peaceful ease, knowing that the universe has taken care of all the details in its own divine way. When you desire peace, simplicity, and honesty, and send out a matching vibration to those desires, all I can say is start watching. It's on its way. A man who personified success at the highest intellectual and social levels would hardly seem one to quote on simplifying our life, yet here's what Albert Einstein offers us on this subject. Possessions, outward success, publicity, luxury, to me, these have always been contemptible. I believe that a simple and unassuming manner of life is best for everyone, best both for the body and the mind. Wow. Chapter 9. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Quote, neither does anyone, however many wounds he may have received, die unless he has run his allotted term of life. Nor does any man, though he sits quietly by the fireside under his roof, escape the more his fated doom. It's written by a great philosopher and playwright named Aeschylus. Inspiration requires faith. After all, returning to spirit while in our physical body is unlikely to be successful if we don't believe that it's possible. We may even have to focus on renewing our faith prior to accessing inspiration, since faith allows us to trust and thereby make use of the vast power that's responsible for creating every physical object in the universe. Faith is an internal knowing that the all-creating Spirit provides what we need precisely on schedule. This doesn't mean that we don't have a voice in what happens to us. We do. But the voice only becomes activated when we get our ego out of the way and realign with Spirit. When our spirit works with the Divine Spirit, we can participate in creation and truly know the meaning of this chapter's title, There's Nothing More Powerful Than an Idea Whose Time Has Come. There's perfect timing in the universe, and our arrival on earth was a part of that synchronicity. In other words, we were an idea of God's whose time had come. This chapter introduces the concept of perfect timing and how to believe in it, notice it, tune into it, and apply it. Faith banishes all doubt. We know that ego has virtually no control over what happens to us. Our body grows, develops, changes, and declines independent of ego's desires or opinions. We know that eventually we'll shed this garment we've been wearing for a lifetime, not when our ego decides, but when that idea's time has come. Re-listen to the quote by Aeschylus at the beginning of this chapter about our allotted term of life as an example of what I'm referring to. Aeschylus was the most famous playwright and scholar of his era, and he claimed direct divine guidance in his writing. He was also a contemporary of Socrates, Lao Tzu, Zoroaster, Buddha, and Confucius, who all lived during the 5th century BC. It's intriguing to note how many visionaries were on the planet simultaneously. Basically, he tells us that the shape of life must run its allotted course, and that we're here to do what Spirit intends. According to Aeschylus, we'll leave Earth and shake off our physical body in concert with Spirit's plan for us. Whether we're ready at age 17, 25, or 105, he advises us to trust in our source. I add to this message that at whatever age we hear these words, it's the right time to realize that we're in the process of surrendering to Spirit for the remaining portion of our allotment. The question now becomes, can we join with Spirit and play a decisive role in what ideas, happenings, events, or people will show up for us? The answer to me is a resounding yes. Recall once again those words of Patanjali that I shared in the opening chapters. When you are inspired, dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. You see, we must have faith in a universe that's created and guided by an intelligence greater than our ego, one where there can be no accidents. When an idea's time has come, it can't be stopped, but by raising our vibration to match that of the universal source of being, we can bring about that idea's time. We can raise our level of consciousness from ego and group dominance to what I call visionary consciousness, in which we reconnect to the mind of God. We banish all doubt by our knowing, which is a higher level of consciousness than believing. Our vision is God's vision, in a manner of speaking. Let me offer you an example of how this visionary consciousness plays out. One of my greatest teachers, and a man I now call my friend, is Ram Dass. He lives from the spiritual faith I'm writing about without doubts or fears. I'd been a long-distance follower and devotee of his for 30 years, always knowing that we'd connect in person. I had this knowing without ever needing to hurry or force what I sensed was a future connection in his and my lifetime. And when that idea's time came, Ram Dass moved to Maui, where I'm writing to you and speaking to you right now, in this moment. Today I have the great pleasure of being in the service of my teacher, helping him in these advanced years of his life. The following self-explanatory letter that I wrote recently is posted on my website, drwaynedyer.com. I'm including it here to precisely illustrate how what I'm relating in this chapter can unfold. One of the truly great men of our time needs our help, and I write these words to encourage your generosity and support. Back in the 1960s, a Harvard professor named Richard Alpert left behind the hectic world of academia and traveled to India. There he was to meet his spiritual teacher, who gave him a new purpose to fulfill, along with a new name. He, of course, is Ram Dass. His guru told him, love everyone, feed people, and see God everywhere. Ram Dass became a person who lived out this mandate, doing what so many of us could only dream. He connected to his spirit and devoted his life to serving others. In 1969, he wrote and published the signature book on spirituality and applied higher awareness, Be Here Now. In keeping with his commitment to love everyone and feed people, he donated all of the royalties and profits to foundations that did just that. With millions of dollars at stake, Ram Dass simply chose to live his life as a man of service to God. After years spent in India in pursuit of a higher, more enlightened consciousness for himself and for our troubled world, he returned to the United States to lecture throughout the country. He spoke to packed venues wherever he went, and as always, he donated the proceeds to such causes as would keep him in harmony with his mandate to serve. He co-founded the SEVA Foundation, www.seva.org, and his writing and lecture fees were primary sources for this compassionate and inspired work. To me, Ram Dass was and is the finest speaker I have ever heard, period. He was my role model on stage, always gentle and kind, always speaking without notes from his heart, sharing his inspiring stories, and always with great humor. I tell you this from my own heart. I could listen to his lectures for hours and always felt saddened when they would end. He was the voice for applied spirituality. His life was the model. When he was threatened by having his own private sexual preferences exposed in a time when a closet was the only place that was even mildly safe, Ram Dass called a press conference and proudly announced his preferences to the world. He paved the way for tolerance and love when no one else would dare to do so. Most of us could only dream of defying the conventional life and living out our inner callings to promote a cause that was bigger than our own lives, to leave the security of a guaranteed career in a country where comfort was ensured, all to live in a foreign land with few conveniences, traveling and meditating for a more peaceful world. It's what St. Francis did in the 13th century, and what Ram Dass did in our lifetime. When Ram Dass's father, who had largely criticized his son's unconventional lifestyle, was close to death, Ram Dass devoted himself to 100% service in those final years. He fed his father, he bathed his father, he placed him on and off the toilet until the day he died. Why? Because he felt this was his mandate. He wanted to experience true service on a 24/7 basis and know firsthand the joy that comes from giving one's own life away in the service of others. Always, for over 30 years, Ram Dass was in the service of others. In 1997, Ram Dass was struck by a semi-paralyzing stroke and became wheelchair-bound. Still, he wrote of his adventure in a powerful book titled Still Here. He continued to travel, although he could no longer walk, and continued to speak to audiences, although he spoke from a slowed-down body. But still, he did it, and he did it to serve others. Now it's our turn. Ram Dass's body can no longer endure the rigors of travel. He's come to Maui, where I live and write. I speak with him frequently, and am often humbled by the tears in his beautiful 74-year-old eyes as he apologizes for not having prepared for his own elderly health care, for what he now perceives as burdensome to others. He still intends to write and teach. However, without the travel, we can now come to him. Maui is healing. Maui is where Ram Dass wishes to stay for now. He is currently living in a home on Maui which he doesn't own and is in jeopardy of losing. I am asking all of you to help purchase this home and to set up a financial foundation to take care of this man who has raised so much money to ensure the futures of so many others, to live out what Ram Dass has practiced with his actions. Please be generous and prompt. No one is more deserving of our love and financial support. In the end, any donations will help ensure that Ram Dass and his work will reach another generation, or remind a current generation that it is in giving that we receive. If there has ever been a great spirit who lived in our lifetime, literally devoting his life to the highest principles of spirit, it has been Ram Dass. I love this man. He has been my inspiration and the inspiration for millions of us. It is now time to show him how we feel by doing what he has taught all of us to do. Just be here for him now. If you're inclined, please send any donations to Ram Dass, care of Hay House, at P.O. Box 5100, Carlsbad, California, 92018. Truly, giving is receiving and vice versa. Ram Dass lived a life of giving by staying in spirit. I was sent to this man who has meant so much to me. I always had a knowing that I'd be involved in his mission and his life. It was an idea that I held in spirit for several decades, and now its time has come and cannot be stopped. If you feel called to help, you can send in any contributions, and I will see that it goes directly to Ram Dass. It was Ram Dass's total belief in what his spiritual teacher told him to do with his life that allowed this all to unfold. When we banish all doubt in favor of faith, There's nothing more powerful on this planet. You must believe, and then you'll see it unfolding right before your eyes. Spirit's timing at work. The power of an idea whose time has come is really the power of spirit at work. Equality for all is how God is, for instance, and we seek to be like God. When enough of us, along with one or two at visionary consciousness, begin to contemplate these in-spirit ideas, they can't be stopped. Let's take some time here to note a few such ideas from America's history. When it was time for the unspeakably horrid practice of slavery to be abolished, that was an idea whose time had come. This was because a critical mass of individuals with a new vision for humanity began to contemplate something that had been espoused a few generations earlier. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It took more than 85 years after Thomas Jefferson wrote these words, but then the idea couldn't be stopped. Even though slaves represented a tiny part of the population and had no voting rights, when a man with visionary consciousness, Abraham Lincoln, along with many others, approached this idea from an inspirational perspective, it was clear that the time had indeed come to end slavery. This new idea of equality for all is the way of spirit. Next, we can see also an idea whose time had come in the granting of voting rights for women in 1920. Despite the opposition of a non-visionary president, Woodrow Wilson, and over the objection of a majority of men who had voting privileges, the idea couldn't be stopped. Several visionary women who aligned with many other men and women believed and made it happen, a right that we take for granted today. Next, the racial integration of the United States is another example of an idea whose time had come. When this concept began to surface in the visionary consciousness of a few people such as John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Lyndon Johnson, and Rosa Parks, it couldn't be stopped. Despite the objections of millions of people, many of whom were in positions of political power, today, in schools that once practiced segregation, we have a multiracial student body. It's still in the process of manifesting everywhere in our society, but make no mistake about it, this idea cannot be stopped. Next, gay rights is another idea whose time has come. One of the many reasons I admire Ram Dass so much is the stand he took a long time ago on equal rights for people of all sexual orientations. No individual or group can be denied legal or social privileges because we all come from one source, which excludes no one. An idea whose time has come is always in perfect alignment with our originating spirit. And finally, the shift in consciousness from a collective belief that smoking in public places is permissible to one where it's not tolerated was an idea whose time had come. The idea became unstoppable when one visionary airline banned smoking on their commercial flights, and then the rest fell into spiritual alignment. When we come from a non-toxic source of well-being, aligning with it is our destiny, and it can't be stopped. I could go on with examples of such ideas manifesting in our society. But instead, I propose that we begin looking around us for evidence of ideas whose time has come. You see, when we're ready, willing, and open to it, the divine guidance we seek will spring into action on our behalf. It has been that way throughout our life. We're in a system that's directed by a supreme intelligence, and we're part of that system. Everything is on purpose. Our vibrational matchup determines what we attract and what we repel in our life. We needn't focus on what's already happened and what we've gone through. Rather, we must shift our vibration upward so that it harmonizes with spirit, and then and only then will spiritually based ideas come knocking on our door. These ideas won't give up or go away because, as we know, there's nothing in this universe more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Our responsibility is simply to become beings who expect and await inspired ideas that will not and cannot be stopped. Truly, there's absolutely nothing in this universe, including ourselves, that isn't perfectly timed. There are no wrongful deaths or mistakes. What shows up is ours, and it showed up precisely on schedule. Before we move on to part 3, I'd like you to think about the simple wisdom that the former slave and philosopher Epictetus imparted to us nearly 2,000 years ago. It is my business to manage carefully and dexterously whatever happens. Now there's a powerful idea whose time has come.